When passengers see a grease-stained mechanic boarding their first-class flight, they see failure. They see someone who doesn't belong. But when the plane's engine screams at 30,000 feet and military jets surround them on an emergency runway, those same passengers will watch a forgotten hero rise from the shadows and discover that the man they dismissed carries a call sign that once made enemies flee and allies stand at attention. This is the story of Evan Carter, the ghost pilot who traded the sky for his son's future, and the moment the world remembered his name. If you're ready to witness a story of hidden sacrifice, unexpected redemption, and the kind of respect that can't be bought, only earned, then stay with me until the end. And when you're done, hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Evan's story flies. The terminal at LaGuardia hummed with the controlled chaos of early morning departures. Business travelers clutched their premium coffee cups like weapons, their expressions fixed in that particular blend of exhaustion and importance that came with frequent flyer status. Families clustered around gate podiums, children whining, parents negotiating. The fluorescent lights cast everything in the same tired corporate glow. Evan Carter stood at the edge of it all, a canvas duffel bag slung over one shoulder, his other hand wrapped firmly around his son's smaller one. "Dad, can I get a snack?" Noah looked up at him with those wide brown eyes that could dissolve any resolve Evan thought he possessed. The boy was 7, all knees and elbows, with a cowlick that refused to be tamed, no matter how much Evan tried to smooth it down before they left the apartment. "We've got granola bars in the bag, buddy." Evan's voice was quiet, roughened by years of breathing in engine fumes and swallowing down words he couldn't afford to say. "We'll save our money for Chicago, okay?" Noah's face fell slightly, but he nodded. Good kid, too good sometimes. At 7 years old, he already understood sacrifice in ways that made Evan's chest tighten. They joined the boarding line for Flight 447 to O'Hare. Evan had saved for 6 months to afford these tickets, a last-minute opportunity to see his mother before her surgery, the kind of thing you couldn't put off no matter what the bank account said. He'd picked up extra shifts at Martinez Auto Works, stayed late every night for weeks, survived on coffee and determination until he had enough to get them both there and back. The tickets were coach, of course. Last row, middle, and window seat, but they were tickets, and that was what mattered. "Boarding Group 7, the gate agent announced, her voice crackling through the speaker system. Evan checked their boarding passes. Group 9. They had time. Noah pressed against his leg, small fingers clutching the worn fabric of Evan's only pair of khaki pants, the ones without grease stains ground so deep that no amount of washing could lift them. The boy's other hand held his treasure, a battered F-15 Eagle model, its paint chipped, one wing held on with superglue and hope. "You think we'll see any real planes from the window?" Noah whispered, reverent. "Maybe on takeoff," Evan said, smoothing down that impossible cowlick one more time. "Keep your eyes sharp." The line moved forward in increments. Evan was acutely aware of the looks they drew. His work boots, cleaned but obviously worn, left faint squeaks on the polished floor. His jacket, a canvas Carhartt that had seen better decades, was practical but decidedly not airport appropriate, according to the silently judging eyes around them. And his hands, Christ, his hands. He'd scrubbed them raw last night, attacked the engine grease with pumice soap until his knuckles bled, but the black crescents remained stubbornly visible under his fingernails. Working man's hands. Poor man's hands. The woman in front of them shifted her Louis Vuitton carry-on a little further away, as if poverty might be contagious. "Boarding Group 9. Evan squeezed Noah's hand. "That's us, buddy." They shuffled forward, handed over their crumpled boarding passes, and entered the jetway. The air changed immediately, that recycled, pressurized smell that was the same on every plane, whether you were flying coach or had flown fighter jets that cost more than most people would earn in 10 lifetimes. Not that anyone here would know that. The aircraft was a Boeing 737, relatively new, well-maintained from what Evan could see in the brief glimpse of the exterior through the jetway windows. His eyes tracked automatically over the engine cowlings, the wing surfaces, the hydraulic systems visible beneath the access panels. Old habits, useless now, but impossible to kill. They stepped into the cabin, and Evan's stomach clenched. First class. They had to walk through it to reach coach, of course. That was the design, make everyone see what they couldn't have, Remind them of their place in the hierarchy. Leather seats spread out in spacious comfort. Passengers already settled in with their champagne and warm towels, their noise-canceling headphones and $1,000 carry-ons stowed in overhead bins that wouldn't be stuffed to bursting. Noah stared, wide-eyed. Evan kept his gaze forward, his grip gentle but firm on his son's hand. Don't look. Don't want. Just keep moving. Excuse me. A flight attendant stepped into the aisle, her smile professional and impenetrable. Sir, you'll need to keep moving. We're still boarding. Yes, ma'am. Evan guided Noah forward, but the aisle was narrow, and a passenger in 3A was standing, wrestling with a bag that probably cost more than Evan's monthly rent. They waited. The man in 3A was mid-50s, silver hair styled within an inch of its life, wearing a suit that screamed custom tailoring. He finally managed to shove his bag into the overhead bin, then turned and nearly collided with Evan, his nose wrinkled, slightly, quickly suppressed. But Evan saw it. The smell of honest work, of engine grease and tire rubber and WD-40, of being too tired to shower before a 6 a.m. flight because you'd worked until 2 a.m. to cover the cost of the trip. Sorry, Evan murmured, making himself smaller, pulling Noah closer. The man said nothing, just turned and settled into his leather seat, already dismissing them from existence. They continued down the aisle, through the galley, past the exit row with its extra legroom that cost an extra $75 Evan didn't have, into the main cabin where the seats got narrower and the overhead bins got fuller and the air got heavier with the resigned patience of people who'd learned not to expect comfort. Row 37, last row of the plane, right in front of the bathrooms. Perfect. Window seat, Noah. Evan boosted his son up, helped him climb over the middle seat, watched him press his face immediately against the plastic window. I can see the wing! Noah's voice carried pure joy, untainted by the disappointment that seemed to coat everything else. Evan stowed their single duffel in the overhead bin, plenty of space back here since most of the serious luggage was up front, and settled into the middle seat. The fabric was worn but clean, the padding compressed from years of supporting bodies in transit. He could feel the metal frame beneath. A woman approached, checking her boarding pass, her eyes landing on the window seat Evan occupied. I think you're in my... Oh. She saw the configuration, saw Noah at the window, saw Evan in the middle. Her seat was the aisle. Right. Sorry for the tight fit, Evan said. She was younger than him, maybe early 30s, dressed in business casual that managed to look both professional and effortless. Her bag went up in the overhead, and she settled into the aisle seat with the practiced efficiency of someone who flew often enough to have a system. The plane continued to fill. Voices overlapped, luggage thumped, flight attendants made announcements that nobody really listened to. Noah kept his face pressed to the window, his F-15 clutched in both hands, whispering a commentary that only he could hear. Evan closed his eyes briefly. Allowed himself this moment. They were on the plane. They were going to make it to Chicago. His mother would have her surgery, and he'd be there when she woke up, and Noah would get to see his grandmother maybe for the last time, though they hadn't told the boy that part. Small victories. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Flight 447 with service to Chicago O'Hare. The announcement pulled Evan back to the present. He reached over and buckled Noah's seatbelt, then fastened his own. The woman in the aisle seat was already absorbed in her phone, thumbs flying across the screen. The cabin door closed with that distinctive thunk that meant commitment. They were sealed in now, this temporary community of strangers bound for the same destination for entirely different reasons. Evan felt the auxiliary power unit kick in, felt the slight vibration change in the airframe. His body responded before his mind could stop it, posture straightening, awareness sharpening, that old familiar anticipation rising in his chest. He forced it down. You're a passenger now, just a passenger. The flight attendants began their safety demonstration. Noah watched with rapt attention, following along with the movements, mouthing the words about oxygen masks and flotation devices. Evan had taught him that, taught him to pay attention, to understand the systems, to respect the machinery that could either kill you or save you, depending on how well you understood it. The woman next to them glanced at Noah, smiled slightly. First flight? No, ma'am, Noah said seriously. We fly sometimes. Dad says it's important to always listen to the safety stuff because that's when they tell you how to survive if things go wrong. The woman's smile faltered slightly. She looked at Evan, really looked at him for the first time. Took in the work boots, the canvas jacket, the hands that told their own story. Smart dad, she said finally. Evan nodded, said nothing. Compliments made him uncomfortable, especially from people who'd probably never had to choose between fixing their car and buying groceries. The plane pushed back from the gate, that familiar sensation of movement, of transition, of being caught between earth and sky. The tug took them away from the terminal, the tractor's engine a low growl beneath them. Then they were moving under their own power, engine spooling up, the 737 CFM56 turbofans generating the distinctive whine that Evan could have identified blindfolded. 27,000 pounds of thrust, each. The numbers came unbidden, useless knowledge, beautiful knowledge. They taxied toward the runway, joining the queue of departing aircraft. Evan tracked it all automatically, the wing surfaces checking themselves, the flaps extending, the spoilers testing their range of motion. All standard, all normal, all exactly as it should be. Dad, what's that? Noah pointed to something on the wing. That's the aileron, buddy. It helps the plane turn. And that? Flap. Gives us more lift on takeoff and landing. The woman in the aisle seat was looking at him again. Evan felt her gaze but didn't return it. He was used to it. The confusion people felt when someone who looked like he did spoke with knowledge about things they assumed were beyond him. Let her wonder. The plane ahead of them rotated, wheels leaving Earth, becoming something other. Evan watched until it disappeared into the low ceiling. Gray morning, threat of rain, ceiling at maybe 3,000 feet. Not great conditions, but flyable. Always flyable, if you knew what you were doing. Their turn. The 737 swung onto the runway, lined up on the center line. Evan felt his heart rate increase despite himself. This part. Always this part. The engines went to full power, that magnificent, terrible roar. The acceleration pressed them back into their seats, and Noah let out a little gasp of delight. Evan's hand found his son's knee, steadied him, shared this moment. 80 knots. The pilot would be calling it out, up there in the cockpit, checking instruments, confirming, 100 knots. V1. Committed now. No stopping. VR. Rotation. The nose came up. The world tilted. And then that moment, that impossible, physical, laws-defying moment, when wheels left runway and they were flying. Noah pressed both hands against the window. We're up. We're really up. We're up, Evan confirmed, his voice rougher than he intended. The landing gear retracted with a solid thunk. The flaps came in. They climbed through the low ceiling, gray nothing surrounding them, and then suddenly, breakthrough. Sunlight. Blue sky. The cloud deck spread beneath them like a cotton ocean. Noah's face glowed with reflected light and pure wonder. Evan looked away, blinking hard. 10 minutes into the flight, the seatbelt sign dinged off. The cabin relaxed. People stood, stretched, headed for the bathrooms. The flight attendants emerged from their jump seats and began preparing the beverage service. Noah was still glued to the window, providing a steady stream of observations that required no response. The cloud formations. A glimpse of the ground through a break. Another plane in the distance, contrails streaming. Sir, would you like something to drink? Evan looked up. Flight attendant, same one from earlier, her smile still professional. The cart was beside their row, blocking the aisle. Just water, please, and whatever juice you have for my son. Apple or orange? Noah? Evan touched his son's shoulder. Apple or orange juice? Apple. Noah didn't look away from the window. The flight attendant poured, handed over the plastic cups, moved on. Evan sipped his water. It was cold, clean, unremarkable. Everything water should be. He'd learned not to take that for granted. Clean water, safe flights, moments of peace between crises. The woman in the aisle seat had accepted a coffee. She was back on her phone, scrolling through what looked like emails. Her jaw was tight, her shoulders tense. Work stress, probably. The kind that came with salary and benefits and the luxury of worrying about quarterly reports instead of rent. Dad. Noah's voice dropped to a whisper. I have to use the bathroom. Of course he did. They always did. 10 minutes after the seatbelt sign turned off. Okay, buddy, let me get up. Evan unbuckled, stood, and immediately realized the problem. The woman in the aisle seat would have to get up too. There was no maneuvering past her, not in these seats. Excuse me, he said quietly. She looked up, saw the situation, sighed slightly. Of course. She unbuckled and stood, stepping into the aisle. Evan helped Noah out, pointed him toward the bathroom. I'll wait right here, okay? Lock the door. I know, Dad. Eye roll. 7 years old and already mastering the art. The woman settled back into her seat. Evan remained standing, too aware of taking up space, too conscious of the imposition. The bathroom door clicked locked. He waited. 30 seconds of silence. Your son seems like a good kid. The woman's voice startled him. Evan looked down at her. He is. Thank you. You teach him about planes? When I can. Careful now, careful. He's interested in them. Must run in the family. Evan said nothing. The bathroom door unlocked. Noah emerged, hands damp from washing, a proud smile on his face. I remembered to wash. Good man. Evan guided him back to their seats, helped him climb over again. The woman stood, let Evan pass, settled back down. Normal. All normal. Just a father and son on a flight to Chicago. The plane reached cruising altitude, 35,000 feet, Evan estimated, from the pitch of the engines and the feel of the air. The flight attendants completed their service. The cabin fell into that peculiar limbo of mid-flight, not quite comfortable, not quite bored, everyone existing in this temporary suspension of real life. Noah had finally torn himself away from the window and was now flying his F-15 through imaginary combat, complete with whispered sound effects. The plane swooped and dove in his small hands, executing maneuvers that would have been impressive if they were possible. Which they weren't, Evan knew, but that was the joy of being 7. Physics were optional if your imagination was strong enough. Pew, pew, Noah whispered. Missile lock. Fox 2. Evan's hand tightened on the armrest. Old terminology. He'd taught Noah that without thinking, shared pieces of a language he wasn't supposed to speak anymore. The woman glanced over, eyebrow raised. That's pretty specific for a toy plane. He watches a lot of documentaries, Evan said. Not entirely a lie. They did watch documentaries, just not the kind that taught you what Fox 2 meant. An hour passed, then another. The flight was smooth, unremarkable. Evan felt himself relaxing despite his best intentions, the tension in his shoulders easing incrementally. Noah had settled down, the F-15 Eagle resting on the tray table in front of him while he colored in the activity book they'd brought. A $1 store purchase that was keeping him occupied far better than it had any right to. The first sign of trouble was subtle, a change in engine pitch. Nothing dramatic, just a slight fluctuation that probably nobody else noticed. Evan noticed. His eyes cut to the window, tracking. The engine cowling looked normal. No smoke, no visible damage. Probably just a minor adjustment, a computer correction, something routine. But then it happened again. The pitch shifted, evened out, shifted again. Like the engine was hunting, trying to find equilibrium and missing it. Evan's heart rate kicked up. Old instincts firing. He forced himself still, forced his breathing even. It was fine. Planes had redundancies, multiple systems. It was fine. The pilot's voice came over the intercom, calm and professional. Folks, this is Captain Williams from the flight deck. We're experiencing a minor technical issue with one of our engines. Nothing to be concerned about. We train for this regularly, but as a precaution, we're going to be diverting to McGuire Air Force Base in New Jersey for a maintenance check. We'll have you on the ground in about 15 minutes. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for landing. The cabin erupted in noise. Questions, complaints, that particular brand of passenger outrage that came with inconvenience. Phones came out immediately, people texting about delays, missed connections, ruined schedules. Noah looked up at Evan, eyes wide. Is the plane okay? It's fine, buddy. Evan kept his voice steady, certain. Pilots are just being extra careful. That's their job, to be extra careful. Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. The flight attendants moved through the cabin, their smiles still in place, but tighter now, professional masks over concern. The woman in the aisle seat had gone pale. An engine failure? Her voice pitched higher. We're going to crash? No. Evan's voice cut through her rising panic. We're not going to crash. These planes can fly perfectly well on one engine. The pilots are just being cautious. McGuire is right there. We'll be down before you know it. She stared at him. How do you... The plane banked, not sharply, but noticeably, turning back, descending. Evan felt it in his bones, in the part of him that understood flight the way some people understood music. They were losing altitude at about 1,500 feet per minute. Controlled, deliberate. Good pilots up there. Noah had gone quiet, his small hand finding Evan's and gripping tight. The F-15 Eagle was forgotten on the tray table. Dad? I've got you. Evan squeezed back. Look at me, Noah. Nothing bad is going to happen, I promise. The boy nodded, trusting him completely. Absolutely. That faith was terrifying and humbling in equal measure. The descent continued. Through the window, Evan caught glimpses of New Jersey landscape. They were over the Pine Barrens, that vast expanse of protected wilderness. And there it was. McGuire Air Force Base, the runway visible even from this altitude. Home. Once upon a time. The landing gear deployed early. Standard emergency procedure. Get them down and locked. Eliminate one more variable. The plane slowed further, flaps extending to their landing configuration. Cabin crew, please be seated for landing. The flight attendants buckled into their jump seats. The cabin was silent now, except for the changed pitch of the remaining good engine and the whispered prayers of passengers who'd suddenly remembered faith. Evan watched the approach. Perfect glide slope. 3-degree descent path. The pilots knew what they were doing, handling this bird like it was made of glass and dreams. 1 mile out. Half a mile. The runway came up to meet them. Evan saw the emergency vehicles already staged. Fire trucks, ambulances, the full response team. Protocol. Nobody was taking chances. Touchdown. The wheels kissed the runway with barely a bump. Thrust reversers deployed immediately, the good engine screaming as it helped slow them down. The plane decelerated smoothly, professionally, and turned off the runway onto a taxiway where emergency personnel were already moving into position. They rolled to a stop. For a moment, there was absolute silence in the cabin. Then someone started clapping, and the rest joined in, that awkward relief applause that always followed a scare. The pilots had done their jobs. Everyone was safe. Crisis averted. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to McGuire Air Force Base. Captain Williams's voice carried a smile now. As you can see, we're all safe on the ground. Emergency crews are just being thorough. We'll keep you updated on our status. In the meantime, please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. Noah was vibrating with excitement, the fear forgotten. Dad, we landed at an Air Force base. A real one. Can we see the jets? I don't know, buddy. We'll see. The woman in the aisle seat was still pale, but color was returning. She looked at Evan with something like respect. You were very calm. Panicking doesn't help anyone, Evan said quietly. Outside, he could see the emergency personnel conducting their assessment. Fire crews with foam equipment, maintenance personnel already examining the troubled engine. And beyond them, just visible past the terminal building, F-15s. A whole flight line of them. Strike eagles, from the look of them. Beautiful birds, lethal, perfect. His chest ached. 20 minutes passed. The pilots kept the remaining engine running, maintaining aircraft power and climate control. The passengers grew restless, the adrenaline wearing off, replaced by irritation at the inconvenience. Evan sat still, patient, watching the activity outside, watching the base come to life around them, watching the past he'd left behind spread out beyond the window like a photograph he couldn't quite bring himself to throw away. Dad? Noah tugged his sleeve. Why are you sad? I'm not sad, buddy. Your face is, though. 7 years old, too perceptive, too much like his mother. Just tired, Evan said, which was true enough. He was always tired, bone deep, soul tired, the kind that sleep didn't fix. A vehicle approached the plane. Official, with Air Force markings. It parked, and 3 figures emerged. Evan couldn't see clearly from this distance, but the way they moved, the way they held themselves. Active duty. Officers, probably. His pulse jumped. The door to the aircraft opened. Fresh air rushed in, carrying with it the scent of jet fuel and possibility. A ground crew member appeared, speaking to the flight attendants in low tones. Then one of the attendants approached the front of the cabin. "Excuse me, everyone. The base commander has invited everyone to disembark and wait in the terminal while we complete our maintenance inspection. It'll be more comfortable than sitting here, and there are facilities available. Please take all your belongings. We'll keep you informed about our departure status." The cabin erupted in movement, people unbuckling, gathering bags, already complaining about the delay, and planning their social media posts about the drama. Evan helped Noah gather their minimal belongings. The duffel from overhead, the colored book and crayons, the precious F-15 Eagle clutched once again in small hands. They joined the line shuffling toward the exit, moving slowly, inevitably, toward the door, toward the stair that had been wheeled up to the aircraft, toward the tarmac and the base and everything Evan had worked for 7 years to leave behind. His hands were shaking slightly. He shoved them in his pockets. "Come on, buddy." His voice came out steadier than he felt. "Let's go see what a real Air Force base looks like." Noah's face lit up with an excitement that made all of this worth it. Every sacrifice. Every morning waking up with aching hands and an aching back. Every moment of judgment from people who saw grease stains and assumed they knew his whole story. This moment of pure joy on his son's face. They descended the stairs. Evan's work boots touched the tarmac of McGuire Air Force Base for the first time in 7 years. The sun was higher now, burning off the morning clouds. The air smelled exactly how he remembered, JP-8 fuel and hot metal and that indefinable scent of purpose. Noah gripped his hand tight, staring around with saucer eyes. "Dad, look! Those are F-15s, real ones, just like my plane." "I see them, buddy." The passengers were being herded toward a terminal building. Someone in uniform was directing traffic, courteous and efficient. Military precision applied to civilian chaos. Evan kept his head down, moving with the crowd. Just another passenger, just another civilian. Nobody special. Nobody worth noticing. The terminal doors opened automatically, welcoming them into air-conditioned comfort. The space was functional rather than glamorous. Hard floors, metal benches, vending machines. A few service members passed through, going about their business, barely glancing at the unexpected civilian influx. Evan found a bench away from the main group and sat. Noah pressed against the window immediately, nose to glass, drinking in every detail of the flight line visible beyond. "Those are the big ones, right, Dad? The Strike Eagles?" "That's right. Can we get closer?" "I don't think so, buddy. We're civilians. We have to stay in here." Noah's face fell, but he nodded, understanding, always understanding. Evan leaned back against the wall and closed his eyes. Just for a moment, just to gather himself. He could hear the other passengers around him, complaining about the delay, worried about connections, demanding answers from airline staff who had none to give. The usual litany of air travel grievances, amplified by actual emergency. The woman from their row sat nearby. She'd pulled out a laptop, was typing furiously, already working. Because of course she was. People like her didn't let inconveniences like engine failures slow them down. Time passed. Evan wasn't sure how much. His body was here on this bench, but his mind kept drifting. Old memories, old decisions, the life he'd chosen to leave and the reasons why. "Daddy, look!" Noah's excited whisper cut through the fog. "Those pilots are coming this way." Evan opened his eyes. 3 officers were indeed entering the terminal. Flight suits. Different squadrons from the patches. They were talking amongst themselves, casual, professional, probably just passing through. The terminal was a common area after all. Lots of people used it. But then one of them stopped, looked directly at the group of civilian passengers, looked directly at Evan. No, it was fine. There was no reason for recognition. He was nobody. Just another face in the crowd. 7 years was a long time. People forgot. They moved on. The officer said something to his companions. They looked over too, started walking toward the civilians. Evan's heart rate spiked. He forced himself to remain still, relaxed. Nothing to see here. Nothing remarkable about a mechanic and his kid waiting out a maintenance delay. The officers drew closer. Evan could see their name tags now, their rank. The one in front was a major, squadron commander probably. The other two were captains. They were definitely approaching, definitely looking at him. The major stopped directly in front of Evan, looked him up and down, taking in the work boots, the canvas jacket, the grease-stained hands. His expression was unreadable. Then his eyes dropped to Evan's left wrist, to the steel band that had ridden there for so long that Evan had stopped noticing it. Brushed metal. Simple design. And on the inside, where nobody could see unless they were looking for it, an engraving, numbers and letters, a call sign that meant nothing to civilians and everything to the people who'd flown with the man who'd earned it. The major's face changed, shock first, then something like disbelief. Then he snapped to attention and saluted. The terminal fell absolutely silent. The salute hung in the air like a freeze frame, impossible and undeniable. Evan's breath caught in his chest. Around them, conversations died mid-sentence. Phones lowered. Every eye in the terminal turned toward the tableau. A major in full flight suit, standing at rigid attention, rendering honors to a man in work boots and a grease-stained jacket. Noah's small hand tightened on Evan's arm. "Dad?" Evan couldn't move. 7 years of carefully constructed anonymity, of deliberate invisibility, crumbling in the space of a single gesture. His throat worked, but no sound came out. The major held the salute, unwavering, waiting. Training older than thought took over. Evan's body responded before his mind could override it, spine straightening, shoulders back, hand rising to return the salute with a precision that muscle memory had preserved perfectly. The movement was automatic, flawless, exactly as it had been drilled into him 2 decades ago. For 3 heartbeats, they held it. Officer and enlisted, present and past. The gesture carried weight that transcended rank, spoke of things that had no words. Then, simultaneously, they dropped their hands. "Sir," the major's voice carried across the silent terminal. "Captain Marcus Webb, 493rd Fighter Squadron, it's an honor." The title hit Evan like a physical blow. "Sir." He hadn't been called that in 7 years. Hadn't allowed himself to be called that. The word belonged to someone else, someone who no longer existed. "I'm not..." Evan's voice came out rough, barely above a whisper. He cleared his throat, tried again. "I'm not active duty anymore, Major. Haven't been for a long time. With respect, sir, some things don't change just because you take off the uniform." Webb's eyes dropped again to the steel band on Evan's wrist, then back to his face. "I did my thesis at the War College on the Kandahar Valley operation. Studied every engagement, every tactical decision." He paused, and something like reverence entered his expression. "You saved a lot of lives that day." Evan felt the walls closing in. The other passengers were staring now, openly confused. The woman from their row had her laptop forgotten, watching with undisguised curiosity. And Noah, Noah was looking up at him with questions written all over his small face. "Major, I don't think... Condor, is that really you?" One of the captains had stepped forward, a younger man with sharp eyes and a Tennessee drawl. He was staring at Evan like he'd seen a ghost. "Holy hell it is! Captain Blake Morrison, sir. I flew with the 389th out of Al Udeid. Your tactics manual was required reading for every new pilot in my squadron." The name punched through Evan's defenses. Condor, his call sign. The identity he'd buried so deep he sometimes forgot it had ever been real. "I think there's been a mistake." Evan stood slowly, carefully, aware of Noah pressed against his leg. "I appreciate the recognition, but I'm just trying to get my son to Chicago. We're not looking for..." "Daddy, what are they talking about?" Noah's voice was small, uncertain. "Why did that man salute you? What's Condor?" Before Evan could answer, Webb was gesturing to his companions. "Get Colonel Harrison, now, and call over to the Heritage Center. See if Major General Bridger is still on base." "That's really not necessary," Evan said, but his protest died as more uniformed personnel began filtering into the terminal, drawn by the commotion. Word was spreading fast. He could see it in the way the newcomers looked at him, did double takes, started whispering to each other. Morrison had pulled out his phone, was already texting. "Sir, The general is going to want to meet you. He talks about your operational planning like it's scripture. The man has your published papers framed in his office. Evan's hands were shaking. He shoved them back in his pockets, fighting the urge to bolt. But where would he go? They were on a military base, surrounded by people who apparently knew exactly who he used to be, who they thought he still was. Please. The word came out harder than he intended. Major Webb, I understand you mean well, but I'm here with my son. We don't need a reception committee. We just need to wait for our plane to be fixed. Webb's expression softened slightly, and for the first time he looked at Noah. Really looked at him. The boy was clutching his toy F-15 Eagle, his eyes huge, trying to process the strange adults who were treating his father like someone important. Of course, sir. I apologize for the disruption, but Webb didn't back away. Instead, he gestured toward a quieter corner of the terminal. Could we speak privately for just a moment? I promise not to take much of your time. Every instinct screamed at Evan to refuse, to grab Noah and find somewhere, anywhere, else to wait. But he could feel the weight of all those watching eyes, could see the phones coming out, the photos being snapped. Refusing would only make it worse. Noah, buddy, can you sit right here for just a minute? Stay where I can see you. But Dad! 1 minute, I promise. Evan guided his son to a nearby bench, made sure he was settled. Don't move from this spot, okay? Noah nodded, but his expression was troubled. Evan hated putting that look on his son's face. Hated all of this. He followed Webb a few feet away, still within line of sight of Noah. Morrison and the other captain, Evan hadn't caught his name, flanked them like honor guards, like he was someone worth protecting. Webb lowered his voice, speaking quickly. Sir, I know this must be uncomfortable, but you have to understand, most of the pilots on this base grew up studying your work. The things you did, the innovations you brought to air combat tactics. He shook his head. You're a legend, and then you just disappeared. No forwarding address, no transition to contractor work, nothing. People wondered. People should mind their own business. Evan kept his voice flat, but old pain bled through anyway. Morrison stepped closer. Sir, we heard rumors about what happened, about your last mission. His young face carried genuine sympathy. I can't imagine. Then don't. Evan cut him off. Don't imagine, don't ask. What happened is done. I made my choices, and I'm living with them. But to walk away completely. Webb gestured at Evan's appearance, the evidence of a life far removed from military service. You could have consulted, taught, done contract work. Instead, He trailed off, clearly struggling to find diplomatic phrasing. Instead, I'm a mechanic. Evan finished for him, letting the words land hard. I work on cars. I change oil and rotate tires and replace brake pads. I clock in at 7 and clock out at 5, and I go home to my son. That's my life now. It's a good life. I didn't mean to suggest. Yes, you did. Evan held the major's gaze. You meant exactly that. Because you can't understand why someone would choose simple over significant, why someone would trade a legacy for normal. But you know what the difference is, Major? I sleep at night now. Most nights, anyway. The lie tasted bitter, but he'd told it so many times it almost felt true. Webb opened his mouth to respond, but a new voice cut through the tension. Condor, that's actually you? Evan turned to see an older man approaching, silver-haired and sharp-eyed despite the lines that bracketed his mouth and crinkled at his temples, colonel's eagles on his shoulders, the stance of a career officer who'd earned every inch of rank. And then Evan recognized him. Harrison? Last I checked, Colonel David Harrison's face split into a grin that shaved years off his appearance. Though I had a lot more hair when we flew together. Jesus, Carter, we all thought you were dead, or at least living on some beach in Thailand. New Jersey? Evan couldn't help the small smile that tugged at his mouth. Harrison had been his wingman on dozens of missions, had saved his ass more times than he could count. Close enough to Thailand, right? Harrison laughed, then seemed to really see Evan. The smile faded into something more complicated. You look different. It's been 7 years. That's not what I mean. Harrison moved closer, his voice dropping so only Evan could hear. You look like you've been carrying something heavy for a long time." The accuracy of that observation made Evan's chest tighten. He glanced back at Noah, who was still sitting obediently on the bench, watching everything with those two perceptive eyes. "I should get back to my son." "That your boy? The one with the F-15? Harrison followed his gaze. "He looks like you. Same stubborn chin." "He's why I'm here. My mother's having surgery in Chicago. We're just trying to get there. And instead you got diverted to your old stomping grounds." Harrison shook his head. "Universe has a sense of humor." He paused, then asked carefully, "How long has it been since you were on a base?" 7 years, give or take. That's a long time to be away from home. "This isn't my home anymore." Evan said it firmly, needing Harrison to understand. "My home is a 2-bedroom apartment in Hoboken. My home is my son's school and the auto shop and the grocery store that's open late when we need milk. This," he gestured at the terminal, the flight line visible beyond. "This is the past." Harrison studied him for a long moment. Then, quietly, "You know, when you left, a lot of people were angry. Thought you were running away from what happened. Some said you were a coward for not facing it." The words stung, but Evan had heard worse in his own head. "They weren't wrong." "Like hell they weren't." Harrison's voice carried the edge of command now. "I was there, remember? I saw what you saw. I watched you make the call that saved 17 lives at the cost of 2. I watched you carry that guilt even though any rational person would tell you that you did the right thing, the only thing." He stepped closer. "And then I watched the system chew you up for it. The inquiry, the second-guessing, the armchair quarterbacks who'd never had to make that kind of decision, passing judgment on yours. You didn't run from the mission, Carter. You ran from the aftermath. There's a difference." Evan's throat was tight. "I appreciate what you're trying to do, but nothing. You want to know what I think? I think you're standing here in work boots and grease-stained hands pretending to be someone small and forgettable because you're terrified that if you let yourself be who you actually are, you'll remember what it cost you." Harrison's expression softened. "And I think your son deserves to know the truth about his father." My son deserves a father who's present, who picks him up from school and helps with homework, and doesn't wake up screaming from nightmares about burning aircraft." Evan's voice came out sharper than intended. "That's what he deserves. He can have both." "No, he can't. I tried that. It doesn't work." Before Harrison could respond, Noah's voice cut through, high and excited. "Dad! Dad! Come look!" Evan turned to see his son pressed against the terminal windows again, pointing at something on the flight line. Several other passengers had joined him, and even from here Evan could see what had caught their attention. An F-15 Strike Eagle was taxiing toward the terminal, its canopy open, the pilot clearly visible. As they watched, it rolled to a stop about 50 yards from the building, precisely positioned for maximum visibility. Webb appeared at Evan's elbow. "That would be Major General Bridger. He insisted on coming over personally when he heard you were here." "Of course he did." Evan pinched the bridge of his nose. This was spiraling out of control. The F-15's engines wound down. The pilot climbed out with practiced ease, dropped to the tarmac, and started walking toward the terminal. Even in full flight gear, his bearing screamed authority. Noah was vibrating with excitement. "Dad, that pilot just landed right there. He came just to see us." "Not us, buddy. Just me." "Why? What did you do? How did you answer that? How did you explain to a 7-year-old that his father used to be someone different, someone whose decisions had shaped policy and saved lives and ended them, someone who'd been decorated and honored and then broken by the weight of it all?" "It's complicated, Noah. You always say that when you don't want to explain. Too smart, too perceptive, too much." The terminal doors opened and Major General Bridger entered. He was in his mid-50s, lean and sharp-edged, with the kind of presence that made people automatically straighten up. He scanned the room, found Evan immediately, and headed straight for him. Everyone in the terminal was watching now. The civilian passengers, the military personnel, everyone. This wasn't a quiet reunion anymore. This was a spectacle. Bridger stopped in front of Evan and offered his hand. "Captain Carter, it's an honor to finally meet you in person." Evan shook it, feeling the firm grip, the calluses of someone who still flew regularly despite the stars he'd earned. "I'm not a captain anymore, sir. Haven't been for a long time. Once a captain, always a captain, especially one who revolutionized modern air combat doctrine." Bridger's smile was genuine, warm. "Your work on multi-axis engagement theory is still taught at every fighter weapons school in the world. Do you know that?" "I didn't, sir." Because he deliberately avoided knowing anything about his former life, had built walls so thick that information like that couldn't penetrate. "Well, it is. Your tactical innovations have saved countless lives. You should be proud." Evan said nothing. Pride felt like a luxury he hadn't earned. Bridger seemed to sense the resistance. His expression shifted, became more personal and less official. "I know you've been away for a while. I know you had your reasons. But you're here now, on this base, and I'd like to show you something before your flight leaves, if you're willing." "General, I appreciate the gesture, but bring your son." Bridger glanced at Noah, who was still clutching his toy F-15. "How old is he?" 7. Perfect age. Bridger's smile widened. "When I was 7, my father took me to an air show, changed my whole life. Let me return the favor." Evan felt the trap closing. Every eye in the terminal was on them. Noah was watching with barely contained hope. Refusing now would create more questions, more attention. And some small, treacherous part of him, the part he'd tried so hard to kill, wanted to say yes. "What did you have in mind, sir?" "A tour of the flight line. Meet some of the pilots. Let your son see what his father's legacy looks like." Bridger paused. "And maybe, if you're comfortable with it, let him sit in a cockpit." Noah gasped audibly. "Dad, please, can we?" Evan looked down at his son's face, saw the naked longing there. When was the last time he'd seen Noah look that excited about anything? When was the last time he'd been able to give his son something that wasn't measured in dollars and sacrifice? "Just a tour," Evan said finally. "An hour, tops. Then we need to get back here and wait for our flight." "Understood." Bridger gestured toward the doors. "Shall we?" Noah grabbed Evan's hand, practically pulling him forward. Harrison fell into step beside them, and Webb and Morrison followed. They moved toward the exit in a small procession, collecting more uniformed personnel as they went. Word had clearly spread. There were at least 20 people trailing them by the time they stepped back out onto the tarmac. The sun was high now, burning off the last of the morning clouds. The air shimmered with heat rising from the concrete. In the distance, Evan could hear the whine of jet engines, the constant background music of an active airbase. Noah's hand was sweating in his, but the boy didn't let go. His head swiveled constantly, trying to take in everything at once. "Dad, this is the best day ever." Something in Evan's chest cracked a little. The best day ever was walking around an Air Force base because their commercial flight had an engine failure. What did that say about the life he'd given his son? "You see that hangar over there?" Bridger pointed to a massive structure on the far side of the flight line. "That's where we maintain the F-15s. Every one of these birds gets inspected after every flight, completely torn down and rebuilt every few thousand hours. It's a ballet of precision engineering." "My dad fixes things too," Noah piped up proudly. "He can fix any car. People bring him the really hard ones that nobody else can figure out." Evan felt Harrison's eyes on him, felt the weight of judgment, or maybe just recognition. He'd gone from fixing $50 million aircraft to fixing 20-year-old Hondas. The transition must have seemed incomprehensible to these men. But Hondas didn't kill people when you made mistakes. They approached the flight line, where several F-15s sat in various states of readiness. Crews swarmed over them, checking systems, loading practice munitions, performing the 1,000 small tasks that kept these machines in the air. One of the aircraft was particularly close, its crew chief standing nearby. Bridger led them directly to it. "Chief, this is Captain Evan Carter, call sign Condor, and his son Noah." The crew chief's eyes widened. He snapped to attention. "Sir, it's an honor. Crew Chief Martinez, 493rd. I've read every after-action report you ever filed." "At ease, Chief." Evan's voice carried automatic authority, and he hated how natural it felt. "This is a beautiful bird you're maintaining." "Thank you, sir. She's a good one, just finished a complete avionics upgrade." Martinez looked at Noah, then back at Evan. "Would the young man like to see the cockpit?" Noah's grip on Evan's hand became painful. Can I, Dad? Really? Evan looked at the F-15, sleek and deadly and achingly familiar. Looked at his son's face, radiant with hope. Looked at the gathering crowd of personnel, all watching, all waiting to see what the legend would do. Yeah, buddy, you can. The cheer that went up from Noah could probably be heard back in Hoboken. Martinez grinned and gestured to the ladder. Right this way, young sir. Watch your step now. Noah scrambled up the ladder with the fearlessness of childhood, Martinez guiding him carefully. Evan followed more slowly, muscle memory placing his feet exactly right on rungs he hadn't climbed in 7 years. The cockpit. God, the cockpit. It smelled the same. Avgas and electronics and that particular scent of high-tech machinery. The instruments glowed softly, even in standby mode, arrays of switches and displays that would overwhelm most people but had once been as familiar to Evan as his own face. Noah was already in the seat, his small hands hovering over controls he didn't dare touch, his eyes huge. Dad, this is amazing! How do you fly it? What does this do? And this? Evan climbed up to stand on the ladder beside the cockpit, pointing out systems. That's your heads-up display. Shows targeting information, altitude, airspeed, all projected right in your line of sight, so you don't have to look down at instruments in a fight. This here is your throttle, controls engine power, and these switches? The words flowed without thought. Years of teaching, of briefing new pilots, of living and breathing these systems. It came back so easily it was terrifying. Noah soaked up every word, asking questions faster than Evan could answer them. Below, the crowd had grown. More pilots, more crew chiefs, more people who knew the name Condor and wanted to see the man who'd carried it. Harrison climbed up the ladder on the other side. Kid's a natural. Look how he's sitting, already imagining the stick in his hand. He's 7. I was 5 when I knew. Harrison's voice was quiet, meant only for Evan. Some things are in the blood, Carter. You can't fight that. Watch me. Why? Why fight so hard against who you are? Evan's jaw clenched. Because who I am got good people killed. Who you are saved 17 people that day. 2 men died, and that's a tragedy. But 17 lived, including me. Or did you forget that part? Evan had not forgotten. He remembered every detail of that day with brutal clarity. Remembered the intel that had been wrong, the enemy positions that shouldn't have been there, the split-second decision to break protocol and call in close air support danger close to friendly positions because waiting meant everyone died. Remembered being right. Remembered saving the platoon. Remembered the cheers and the medals and the commendations. Remembered the 2 pilots who'd taken ground fire during the run. Remembered one ejecting successfully and one going down with his aircraft. Remembered the funeral and the widow's face and the knowledge that his decision, the right decision, had created that grief. I remember everything, Evan said quietly. Then remember all of it, not just the parts that let you punish yourself. Before Evan could respond, Noah twisted in the seat to look at him. Dad, did you really fly planes like this? The question hung between them. The crowd below had gone quiet, listening, waiting. Evan met his son's eyes, saw the question beneath the question, saw the beginning of understanding that his father might be more than he appeared. Yeah, buddy, I did. Were you good at it? Such a simple question, such a complicated answer. He was the best. Harrison answered before Evan could. Your dad was the kind of pilot that other pilots wanted to be, the kind that made the impossible look easy. Noah turned back to stare at the instruments with new reverence. His small hands settled on the stick, not gripping, just resting, feeling the potential. Will you teach me? He asked softly. When I'm big enough? Evan's breath caught. He saw the future in that question, saw his son in flight school, in a cockpit, in the same life that had given Evan everything and taken everything and left him hollow. We'll see, he managed. It was a parent's eternal deflection, the answer that meant nothing and everything. Martinez appeared at the base of the ladder. Sir, General Bridger asks if you join him in the squadron ready room. Some of the pilots would like to meet you. Of course they would. This was snowballing beyond control. Noah, time to come down, buddy. 5 more minutes, please? We've already had 5 more minutes. Come on. Noah climbed out reluctantly, with multiple backward glances at the cockpit he was leaving behind. Martinez helped him down the ladder, and Evan followed. The moment his boots hit the tarmac, he was surrounded. Questions came from all directions, overlapping, enthusiastic. Sir, is it true you developed the hammer-anvil tactic used in Syria? Captain Carter, I wrote my master's thesis on your Kandahar mission. Could I ask you a few questions? Sir, the tactical innovation you brought to suppression of enemy air defenses. Evan held up his hands, overwhelmed. Gentlemen, please. I appreciate the interest, but I'm just trying to spend time with my son. Bridger's voice cut through the noise. Give the man some space. That's an order. The crowd immediately stepped back, creating a bubble of quiet. Captain Carter, the ready room is just over here. We'll keep it brief, I promise. They walked across the tarmac, Noah's hand in Evan's, the crowd following at a respectful distance. The ready room was in a building adjacent to the main hangar, marked with the 493rd Squadron insignia. Inside, a dozen pilots in flight suits stood as they entered. The room itself was pure military functional, chairs bolted to the floor, whiteboards covered in mission notes, a podium at the front. Photos lined the walls showing squadron history going back decades. And there, in the center of the wall of honor, was a photo Evan recognized, his old squadron. Taken 12 years ago, everyone young and confident and immortal. He was in the back row, arms crossed, that cocky smile he used to wear before he learned what it actually cost. Noah saw it at the same moment. Dad, is that you? Long time ago, buddy. You look different. I was different. The pilots in the room stood at attention. Bridger gestured for them to sit, then turned to Evan. Gentlemen, this is Captain Evan Carter, call sign Condor. He flew F-15s for 10 years, combat tours in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria. Credited with 37 confirmed air-to-air victories, innovation in tactics that are still in use today, and a mission success rate that has yet to be matched. He paused. Captain Carter, these men and women represent the next generation of air superiority. They've studied your work, they've learned from your innovations, and they wanted the chance to say thank you. One of the pilots stood, a young woman, probably mid-20s, with sharp eyes and a call sign patch that read Valkyrie. Sir, you don't know me, but your tactical manual saved my life in a furball over Yemen last year. I was outnumbered 3-1, and I used your displacement theory to turn the numbers against them. All 3 bandits went down. I went home. Her voice cracked slightly. So, thank you. Another pilot stood, then another, each with a story, each with a moment where Evan's work had reached across years and miles to make a difference. Evan stood frozen, unable to process the weight of what he was hearing. He'd written those manuals, developed those tactics, but always in the abstract, never thinking about the individual lives they might touch. Noah pressed against his leg, quiet now, sensing something important was happening even if he didn't fully understand it. When the last pilot sat down, Bridger spoke again. Captain, I know you've stepped away from active service. I know you have your reasons, and I respect them. But I want you to know the door is always open. We could use someone with your experience, whether that's consulting, teaching, or just being available when we need tactical advice on complex operations. He gestured at the room. You've still got a family here if you want it. Evan looked at the faces surrounding him. Young, eager, looking at him like he had answers instead of just more questions. He thought about Harrison's words on the tarmac, about legacy and sacrifice and the version of himself he'd buried. He thought about Noah's face in that cockpit, wonder and longing mixed together. He thought about 7 years of work boots and grease and anonymous safety, and whether that had been healing or just hiding. I appreciate the offer, General, he said finally. I really do, but my life is different now. My priorities are different. He looked down at Noah. I have responsibilities that matter more than anything else. Being a father, Bridger said, being the right kind of father, the kind who's there, who doesn't carry so much weight that there's nothing left for his kid. Bridger nodded slowly. I understand, but the offer stands, today, tomorrow, 10 years from now. You're always welcome here. The words settled over Evan like a coat he'd thought he'd thrown away, only to find it still fit perfectly. They spent another 30 minutes in the ready room. The pilots asked questions, technical, tactical, historical. Evan answered what he could, deflected what he couldn't. Noah sat beside him, absorbing everything, his toy F-15 Eagle resting on his lap. Finally, Martinez appeared in the doorway. "Sir, I just got word. Your commercial flight has been cleared for departure. They'll be boarding in 20 minutes. Reality reasserted itself. Chicago. His mother. The surgery. The life waiting for them outside these walls. Thank you, Chief. Evan stood and everyone in the room stood with him. I appreciate everything you've all done today. The tour, the hospitality, the recognition. But we need to get going. Handshakes all around. Contact information exchanged, though Evan suspected he'd never use it. Promises to stay in touch that felt sincere in the moment, but would fade with distance. Harrison walked them back to the terminal, just the three of them this time. The crowd had dispersed, returning to duties and routines. You know, Harrison said as they walked, you don't have to choose between being a mechanic and being Condor. There's middle ground. Is there? Evan's voice was tired. Because I haven't found it yet. Maybe you haven't looked. They reached the terminal entrance. Through the glass, Evan could see the other passengers gathering, preparing to reboard. Back to normal. Back to being just another civilian on just another flight. Harrison stopped him with a hand on his shoulder. Carter, Evan, you saved my life that day. You made the call that I couldn't make, took the weight that I couldn't carry. And then you punished yourself for it for 7 years. Don't you think that's enough? Evan looked at his old wingman, saw genuine concern in those familiar eyes. I don't know what enough looks like anymore. Then maybe it's time to figure that out. Harrison crouched down to Noah's level. Hey kid, you take care of your dad, okay? He's kind of special. Noah nodded solemnly. I know. He fixes things. Harrison smiled. Yeah, he does. More than you know. He stood, shook Evan's hand one more time, and stepped back. Blue skies, Condor. Blue skies. The old farewell came automatically, carrying 7 years of absence in 2 words. They entered the terminal. The other passengers barely glanced at them now, already absorbed back in phones and complaints and the minor dramas of delayed travel. The moment of recognition had passed. Evan was anonymous again, except he could still feel the weight of that salute, still hear the thanks from pilots who'd studied his work, still see Noah's face in that cockpit, imagining futures. The boarding call came. They joined the line, handed over boarding passes, walked back through the jetway onto the same 737 that had brought them here. Row 37. Last seat. Nothing had changed, except everything had changed. Noah settled into his window seat, clutching his F-15 Eagle. But he was quieter now, thoughtful in a way that 7-year-olds rarely were. Dad? Yeah, buddy? Why did you stop flying? The question Evan had been dreading, the one he'd hoped wouldn't come for years yet. It's complicated, Noah. You always say that. Because it's always true. The woman from the aisle seat appeared, settling back into her place. She glanced at Evan, and this time there was something different in her expression. Respect, maybe. Or just curiosity satisfied. That was quite a reception, she said quietly. It was unexpected. They treated you like a hero. They treated me like who I used to be. She considered that, then extended her hand. Jennifer Holbrook. I'm a corporate attorney for Morrison & Steele. Evan shook it. Evan Carter. I'm a mechanic. And a former Air Force captain who apparently revolutionized modern air combat. That was a long time ago. Doesn't seem like anyone back there thinks it matters how long ago it was. Jennifer settled back in her seat. For what it's worth, I'm sorry I judged you when we boarded. I saw the work clothes and made assumptions. Most people do. That doesn't make it right, Evan shrugged. I'm used to it. The plane pushed back from the gate. Same tug, same taxi, same routine. But Evan felt different. Like something sealed tight for 7 years had cracked open slightly, letting in air and light and possibility. Noah pressed against the window as they taxied toward the runway. Will we ever come back here? I don't know, buddy. I hope we do. I want to see those jets again. We'll see. They lined up on the runway. The engines spooled up, and as they accelerated down that same strip of concrete where Evan had landed countless times before, he felt something he hadn't felt in 7 years. The pull of the sky. The wheels left the ground, and Noah cheered. Jennifer smiled, and Evan closed his eyes and breathed and felt the weight of the past lifting just slightly, just enough to imagine, for the first time, that maybe there was a future that included both the man he'd been and the father he was trying to be. Maybe Harrison was right. Maybe there was middle ground. Maybe 7 years of penance was enough. The plane climbed through the clouds, and through the window, just for a moment, Evan saw the flight line falling away below, the F-15s growing smaller, the base where he'd left his past waiting like a patient friend, and he thought, just maybe, that someday he might be ready to go back. But not today. Today, he had a mother waiting in Chicago, a son who needed him, a life that was small and simple and entirely his own. The sky could wait a little longer. The rest of the flight to Chicago passed in a strange, suspended quiet. Noah had finally exhausted his endless questions about jets and cockpits and call signs, settling instead into that particular stillness of a child processing experiences too big for his small frame to contain. He pressed his forehead against the window, watching clouds drift past like continents made of vapor, his toy F-15 Eagle resting in his lap with a reverence it had never received before. Evan tried to sleep, but couldn't. His mind kept circling back to the base, to the faces of those young pilots, to the weight of Harrison's words. 7 years. He'd spent 7 years convinced that distance was the same as healing, that if he made himself small enough and quiet enough, the past would eventually stop finding him. McGuire had proven that theory catastrophically wrong. Jennifer Holbrook worked beside him, her laptop open, her fingers moving across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. But every so often, he caught her glancing at him from the corner of her eye, not with the dismissive judgment she'd shown when they first boarded, but with something closer to fascination, like he was a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. Finally, she closed the laptop. "Can I ask you something?" Evan kept his eyes forward. "You can ask." "Why did you really stop flying? And don't say it's complicated. Everything's complicated. I want to know why someone who is apparently that good at something would walk away completely. Why does it matter to you?" "Because I'm a corporate attorney who spends 60 hours a week fighting battles I don't believe in for clients I don't respect. And I keep telling myself I do it because the money's good and the prestige matters." She paused. "And then I meet someone who had both of those things and gave them up anyway. So yeah, I'm curious about what could possibly be worth that sacrifice." Evan looked at her properly for the first time. Really looked. Saw the exhaustion beneath the professional polish, the hint of desperation in someone who'd optimized her life so thoroughly that she'd forgotten to include meaning in the equation. "You want the truth?" "I wouldn't have asked otherwise. I stopped flying because I was good at it, because when you're that good at something that lethal, eventually you have to use that skill, and using it means people die." He kept his voice low, aware of Noah just inches away. "I got tired of being the one who decided who lived and who didn't. I got tired of being right about those decisions and having to live with them anyway." Jennifer absorbed that, her lawyer's mind clearly working through implications. "But surely you saved more lives than you, Don't." Evan cut her off. "Don't do the math. Don't tell me about net positive outcomes or acceptable losses or the greater good. I've heard all of it. I've believed all of it. And none of it changes the fact that I can tell you the names of every pilot who died following my orders, and I can't tell you the names of half the people I saved. That seems backward. That's being human." Evan's jaw clenched. Guilt burns hotter than gratitude, and after a while you realize that being excellent at something that creates that much guilt isn't excellence at all. It's just a different kind of prison. Jennifer was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. "Is being a mechanic better? It's simpler. If I make a mistake, the worst that happens is someone's car breaks down again. Nobody dies. Nobody's widow shows up at my door asking why her husband didn't come home." He glanced at Noah. "And I'm there when my son needs me. Every morning, every night. That matters more than anything I ever did in a cockpit." "Does he know about what you used to do?" "He's 7. He knows I was in the Air Force. He doesn't know the details. Didn't know the details, Evan corrected himself. That changed today. You could have told the general no, could have avoided the whole thing. Could have. Should have. Evan rubbed his face. But I saw my son's face when he realized he might get to sit in that cockpit, and I couldn't take that away from him, even knowing it would open doors I've spent 7 years keeping locked. Jennifer studied him with an expression that might have been sympathy or might have been understanding. You know what I think? I think you're punishing yourself for being human, for making impossible choices in impossible situations and not being perfect. You sound like my old wingman. Maybe your old wingman was right. Before Evan could respond, the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our descent into Chicago O'Hare. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for landing. Noah stirred, sitting up straighter, returning to the window with renewed interest. Are we almost there, Dad? Almost, buddy. Another 15 minutes. The descent was smooth, professional. Chicago appeared beneath them in vast, sprawling gridwork, Lake Michigan, a steel-blue expanse to the east. The city where Evan had been born, where his mother still lived in the same small house in Jefferson Park that he'd grown up in. Where Sarah had left him 3 years ago, taking her disappointment and her inability to live with his demons somewhere he couldn't follow. Where ghosts waited in every familiar street. The 737 touched down with barely a shudder, reverse thrust engaging, speed bleeding away until they were just another aircraft taxiing toward just another gate in just another airport. The spell of the flight broke. Passengers reached for phones, unbuckled prematurely, stood in the aisles despite the illuminated seatbelt sign. Evan waited. Patient. Used to being last. Jennifer stood when the aisle finally cleared, pulling down her expensive carry-on. She looked at Evan one more time. I hope your mother's surgery goes well. Thank you. And for what it's worth, I think your son is lucky to have a father who chose him over legacy. She moved away before Evan could respond, disappearing into the flow of deplaning passengers. Noah grabbed Evan's hand as they finally stood. Is Grandma going to be okay? The doctors are very good, buddy. She's going to be fine. You always say that too, because it's always true. But this time, Evan wasn't sure he believed it himself. The surgery was serious, coronary bypass, 4 vessels, high risk at her age. The doctors had been cautiously optimistic, which was medicine's way of preparing you for the worst while hoping for the best. They made their way through the terminal, following signs toward ground transportation. O'Hare was controlled chaos, thousands of people in constant motion, everyone with somewhere urgent to be. Evan felt small in the middle of it, anonymous again, just another traveler in a sea of them. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, saw his mother's neighbor's number. Mrs. Kowalski, who'd volunteered to take his mother to the pre-op appointment this morning. Hello? Evan? Oh, thank God. Where are you? Mrs. Kowalski's voice was strained. Evan's heart clenched. Just landed. What's wrong? The surgery, they moved it up. Your mother had some chest pains this morning, and the doctor said they couldn't wait. She's in surgery now, has been for about an hour. The world tilted. What hospital? Northwestern Memorial, the cardiac wing. I'm here in the waiting room, but Evan, they said it could be another 6 or 7 hours. The blockages were worse than they thought. I'm on my way. 20 minutes. Tell her, if she wakes up before I get there, tell her I'm coming. She knows, honey. She knows. Evan ended the call, his hands shaking. Noah was looking up at him with those 2 perceptive eyes, already reading the fear Evan was trying to hide. Is Grandma okay? She's in surgery right now, buddy. We need to get to the hospital. They move faster now, Evan's military training kicking in despite himself. Fastest route to ground transportation. Fastest way to get a cab. No time for the L train. No time for anything but the most direct path. Outside, the Chicago air hit them, humid and thick, carrying the scent of the city. Evan flagged down a cab, threw their duffel in the trunk, climbed in with Noah pressed against his side. Northwestern Memorial, he told the driver. Cardiac wing, fast as you can. The driver nodded, pulled into traffic. Chicago streets rolled past, familiar and strange at once. Evan hadn't been back in almost 2 years, had avoided it since the divorce. Since the last time he'd tried to explain to Sarah why he couldn't be the man she'd married, why that version of himself had died over the Hindu Kush, and no amount of wishing could bring him back. Noah was quiet, his small hand gripping Evan's with surprising strength. "Grandma's tough, right, Dad?" "Toughest person I know, buddy." "Tougher than you?" "Way tougher. She raised me by herself after my dad died. Worked 2 jobs, never complained, never gave up. She taught me everything that matters." "Did she teach you how to fly?" The question caught Evan off guard. "No. That was something I found on my own." "Why did you want to?" "How did you explain it? The pull of the sky, the need for something vast enough to contain all the feelings too big for Earth, the way flight had felt like freedom before he learned it could be a cage too. I wanted to be part of something bigger than myself," Evan said finally. "Wanted to matter. Wanted to make a difference. You do matter, Dad. You matter to me." The simple truth of it hit Evan harder than any tactical briefing ever had. Out of the mouths of children, his mother would have said, wisdom disguised as innocence. "You matter to me too, Noah. More than anything." The cab wove through traffic, the driver navigating with the aggressive competence of someone who'd learned to survive Chicago's streets. 20 minutes stretched into eternity, every red light a personal affront, every delay torture. Finally, the hospital. Northwestern Memorial rose like a glass and steel monument to modern medicine, its cardiac wing internationally renowned. The best place she could be, Evan told himself. The absolute best place. He paid the driver, grabbed their bag, and headed for the entrance with Noah's hand locked in his. The lobby was pristine, all smooth surfaces and calming colors designed to make crisis feel manageable. Information desk, directories, volunteers in pink jackets ready to guide lost souls. "Cardiac surgery waiting room," Evan said to the nearest volunteer. "5th floor, east wing. Elevators are right over there." They rode up in silence. The elevator was full of people carrying flowers and worry, visiting loved ones or becoming patients themselves. Evan watched the numbers climb and tried not to think about his mother on an operating table, her chest cracked open, her heart literally in someone else's hands. 5th floor. The doors opened onto a hushed corridor, soft lighting, that particular hospital's smell of antiseptic and barely controlled fear. Signs pointed them toward the cardiac surgery waiting area. Mrs. Kowalski spotted them the moment they entered. She was in her 70s, silver-haired and solid, wearing the same house dress she probably wore every day. Her face crumpled with relief when she saw Evan. "Oh, Evan, I'm so glad you're here." Evan hugged her, this woman who'd been more family than neighbor, who'd looked after his mother when he couldn't be there. "How is she?" "Still in surgery. The nurse came out about an hour ago, said everything was going according to plan, whatever that means." Mrs. Kowalski knelt down to Noah's level. "And who's this handsome young man?" "I'm Noah." The boy's voice was small, uncertain in this place of sickness and worry. "Well, Noah, your grandmother talks about you all the time. She has pictures of you all over her house. Would you like to sit with me and I'll tell you stories about when your daddy was little?" Noah looked at Evan, who nodded. "That's okay, buddy. Mrs. Kowalski is a good friend." They settled into the waiting room chairs, industrial, uncomfortable by design, as if suffering in seating was preparation for suffering in spirit. Evan couldn't sit. He paced, watching the doors that led back to the surgical suites, waiting for updates that never came fast enough. Other families waited too, their own vigils playing out in quiet desperation. An elderly man who kept checking his watch every 30 seconds. A middle-aged couple holding hands so tightly their knuckles had gone white. A young woman crying silently into her phone. Grief and hope and fear, all mixed together in this liminal space. 2 hours passed, then 3. Mrs. Kowalski had somehow produced coloring books and crayons from her bottomless purse, keeping Noah occupied with gentle stories about Evan's childhood misadventures. The time he'd tried to build a plane out of cardboard boxes and launched himself off the garage roof. The time he'd convinced himself he could talk to birds if he just practiced enough. "Always had his head in the clouds, your father," Mrs. Kowalski said, her voice warm with memory. "Your grandmother used to worry he'd float away entirely." Noah giggled, the sound strange and precious in this solemn place. "Dad's too heavy to float away. Maybe now, but as a boy he was light as air. Dreamed big dreams, that one. Evan stood at the window, looking out over Chicago. The city spread beneath them, millions of lives intersecting and diverging, everyone carrying their own weight. Somewhere down there, his old apartment. Somewhere, the parks where he'd pushed Noah on swings before Sarah left. Somewhere, all the ghosts of who he used to be. His phone buzzed. He pulled it out, saw a number he didn't recognize, almost ignored it, then thought better of it. Hello? Captain Carter, this is Colonel Harrison. I hope I'm not overstepping, but I wanted to check in. See how you're doing. Evan closed his eyes. Of all the times for the past to reach forward. My mother's in surgery. Has been for about 5 hours now. Christ, I'm sorry. Is she? I don't know yet. They say no news is good news, but I'm not sure I believe that. Harrison was quiet for a moment. You need anything? Someone to talk to? Someone to sit with you? Anything at all? I'm okay. Mrs. Kowalski is here. Noah's here. I'm managing. Managing isn't the same as being okay. It's all I've got right now. Another pause. Then, Evan, I've been thinking about what happened today at McGuire, about what you said. And I wanted you to know, nobody back here judges you for leaving. Not really. We just miss you, miss what you brought to the team. I can't be that person anymore, Dave. I'm not asking you to be. I'm just saying, when you're ready, if you're ever ready, there's a place for whoever you are now, not who you were, who you are. Evan's throat was tight. I appreciate that. Call me when your mother's out of surgery. Let me know she's okay. Let me know you're okay. I will. He ended the call, slipped the phone back in his pocket, turned to find Noah watching him with those serious brown eyes. Was that one of the pilots from the base? Yeah, buddy, just checking in. They really like you, Dad. They like who I used to be. Maybe that's the same thing. Out of the mouths of children, again. The surgical suite doors opened. A doctor emerged, still in scrubs, pulling off her surgical cap. She scanned the waiting room, found Mrs. Kowalski, who pointed at Evan. Evan's heart stopped. The doctor's face was neutral, professional, unreadable. She walked toward him, and every step felt like an eternity. Mr. Carter, I'm Dr. Patricia Mendez. I was your mother's primary surgeon. How is she? The words came out rough, desperate. Dr. Mendez's face softened into a small smile. She's stable. The surgery went well. We performed a quadruple bypass. 4 vessels were significantly occluded, more than the imaging had shown. But we got good grafts, excellent blood flow, and her heart is responding beautifully. The relief was physical, weakening. Evan had to sit down. She's going to be okay? The next 48 hours are critical, and recovery will be a long process. But your mother is incredibly strong for her age. She came through the surgery better than we expected. She's in recovery now, and you'll be able to see her in about an hour. Thank you. Evan's voice cracked. Thank you so much. Dr. Mendez squeezed his shoulder. She's a fighter. She told me before we put her under that she couldn't die yet because she had to see her grandson grow up. I think that determination made all the difference. She walked away, leaving Evan sitting in the uncomfortable chair with his face in his hands, shoulders shaking with the kind of tears that came from fear transmuted into gratitude. Noah climbed into his lap, small arms wrapping around his neck. Grandma's okay, Dad. The doctor said so. Yeah, buddy, she's okay. Evan held his son close, breathing in the scent of cheap shampoo and airplane recycled air and innocence. She's going to be okay. Mrs. Kowalski was crying too, happy tears that she dabbed at with a tissue pulled from that endless purse. Oh, thank the Lord! Thank the Lord! They waited the prescribed hour. Noah fell asleep against Evan's chest, exhausted by the long day and the emotional weight. Mrs. Kowalski told stories in a low murmur, filling the time with memories of Evan's mother, her kindness, her strength, her fierce love for her only son and only grandson. Finally, a nurse appeared. Mr. Carter, you can see your mother now. Just for a few minutes. She's still quite sedated. Evan gently woke Noah. Come on, buddy. Let's go see Grandma. They followed the nurse through the surgical suite doors down a corridor lined with recovery rooms. The lighting was dimmer here, the sounds muted, machines beeping softly, the whisper of medical staff, the rustle of curtains. His mother's room was at the end. The nurse held the curtain aside, and Evan stepped through with Noah's hand in his. She looked so small in the hospital bed, diminished by tubes and wires and machines. Her face was pale but peaceful, her breathing assisted by oxygen but steady. The monitors showed strong vital signs, the reassuring rhythm of a heart that had been repaired and would keep beating. "Mom," Evan whispered, moving closer. "It's Evan. I'm here." Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then finding him. A weak smile touched her lips. "You made it." "Of course I made it. Wild horses couldn't have kept me away." "Brought Noah?" Evan lifted his son up carefully so she could see him. "Right here, Mom. We're both here." "Good boy." Her hand moved slightly, and Evan caught it, held it gently. "Always, good boy." She was fading already, the sedation pulling her back under, but her grip on his hand tightened fractionally. "Proud of you," she murmured. "So proud. Of the man you are. The father you've become." The words hit Evan like artillery fire. His mother, who'd never said an unkind word about his choices, who'd supported him through the military and the discharge and the divorce and the descent into anonymous labor, who'd loved him unconditionally, even when he couldn't love himself. "I love you, Mom. Love you both. My boys." Her eyes closed. "Don't waste your life punishing yourself. Promise me." "Mom, promise." "I promise." The lie felt necessary, protective. Or maybe it wasn't a lie. Maybe it was aspiration. She smiled, satisfied, and slipped back into sleep. The nurse touched Evan's shoulder gently. "She needs to rest, but you can come back in a few hours. Visiting hours are flexible in the ICU for immediate family." Evan nodded, unable to speak. He set Noah down, and they walked back to the waiting room in silence. Mrs. Kowalski had gathered their things. "I'm going to head home, get some rest. But I'll be back in the morning with real food. Hospital cafeteria is terrible. Thank you for everything." "She's family, Evan. Your family. That's what we do." After she left, Evan and Noah were alone in the waiting room. It was late now, past Noah's bedtime by hours. The boy was struggling to stay awake, his head drooping. "Come on, buddy. Let's find a hotel nearby. We'll come back first thing in the morning." "Promise?" "Promise." They left the hospital, stepped out into Chicago night. The city had transformed in the darkness, lights everywhere, the energy different. Evan found a hotel 2 blocks away, checked in with their single duffel bag, took the key to a room on the 3rd floor. The room was generic, clean, anonymous. 2 double beds, a TV, a bathroom, everything they needed and nothing they wanted. Noah was asleep before his head hit the pillow. Evan pulled off the boy's shoes, covered him with blankets, stood watching his son sleep for longer than was probably healthy. Then he moved to the window, looked out over the city where he'd been born and raised and broken and remade. His phone buzzed again. "Harrison, checking in as promised." "She made it through," Evan texted back. "Recovery will be long, but she's stable." "Good. Glad to hear it. Get some rest." "You too. And Dave, thanks for calling, for caring." "Always, brother. Always." Evan set the phone aside, sat in the chair by the window, and let himself feel everything he'd been holding back all day. The fear for his mother, the confusion about McGuire, the weight of being seen, really seen, after 7 years of invisibility. His mother's words echoed, "Don't waste your life punishing yourself." But what was the alternative? Who was he supposed to be if not the man who'd chosen obscurity over excellence, safety over significance? Maybe there was middle ground, like Harrison said. Maybe there was a way to be both the mechanic and the pilot, the anonymous father and the decorated officer. Maybe those identities didn't have to be at war. Or maybe that was just exhaustion talking, making impossible things seem possible. Noah stirred in his sleep, mumbling something about jets and grandmas and promises. Evan smiled despite himself, despite everything. Tomorrow he'd figure out the rest. Tomorrow he'd make decisions about what came next, who he wanted to be, whether 7 years of penance was enough. Tonight, he just needed to be grateful. His mother was alive, his son was safe, they were together. Everything else could wait. But as Evan finally climbed into bed, as sleep came to claim him, he couldn't stop thinking about that cockpit at McGuire. The way it had felt to stand beside it again, to explain systems to his son, to remember what it was like when flying meant freedom instead of guilt. Couldn't stop thinking about Jennifer's words on the plane, about being human, about impossible choices and the weight of perfection. Couldn't stop thinking about what might happen if he actually tried to find that middle ground Harrison kept talking about. The thoughts followed him into dreams. Dreams of flying, of Noah in the cockpit beside him, of his mother watching from the ground with pride instead of worry. Dreams where the past and present weren't at war but dancing, finding rhythm, becoming something new. When he woke 6 hours later to the gray light of Chicago dawn, Evan realized something had shifted. Not dramatically, not completely, but enough. Enough to wonder, enough to question, enough to imagine that maybe, just maybe, there was a version of himself that could exist somewhere between who he'd been and who he'd tried to become. His phone showed 3 missed calls from McGuire, 2 emails, a text from Harrison that just said, "Call me when you can." The world wasn't done with Condor yet, apparently. The question was whether Condor was done with the world. Evan looked at Noah, still sleeping peacefully, his toy F-15 Eagle tucked under one arm like a teddy bear. Looked at his own hands, still stained with grease that no amount of washing could fully remove. Looked at the path behind him and the paths ahead, diverging in a dozen different directions. And for the first time in 7 years, he allowed himself to believe that maybe he didn't have to choose just one. The hospital cafeteria at 6:30 in the morning was a study in fluorescent bleakness. Evan sat across from Noah at a table near the window, watching his son push scrambled eggs around his plate without much interest. The boy had been quiet since waking up, processing yesterday's revelations in that slow, thoughtful way children had when their understanding of the world suddenly expanded beyond comfortable boundaries. "You should eat, buddy," Evan said gently. "It's going to be a long day." "I'm not really hungry." Noah poked at a piece of toast. "Dad, why didn't you tell me you were famous?" The question hung between them like smoke. Evan set down his coffee cup, choosing his words carefully. "I'm not famous, Noah. I was just good at my job." "Those pilots treated you like you were famous. They saluted you. They said you were a legend." "That's different from being famous. That's just respect between people who do the same kind of work." Noah looked up, and his eyes carried an accusation that was all the sharper for being innocent. "You always tell me not to lie, but you lied to me about who you are." The words landed like a gut punch. "I never lied to you." "You didn't tell me the truth either. That's the same thing." 7 years old and already a philosopher. Evan rubbed his face, feeling the stubble that rasped under his palms, the exhaustion that went deeper than one night's poor sleep could explain. "You're right," he said finally. "I should have told you more. But Noah, the person those pilots were talking about, that's not who I am anymore. That's who I used to be. There's a difference." "Why did you stop being him?" "How did you explain trauma to a 7-year-old? How did you make a child understand that excellence could be its own kind of poison? That being the best at something terrible didn't make it less terrible? Because being that person meant making really hard choices. Choices that kept people safe but also hurt people. And after a while I realized I didn't want to be the one making those choices anymore." Evan reached across the table, covered Noah's small hand with his own. "I wanted to be your dad instead. Just your dad. That seemed more important." Noah considered this, his young mind working through complexities he shouldn't have to face yet. "But Grandma said you shouldn't waste your life punishing yourself." "What did she mean?" "She meant..." Evan stopped, struggled for words. "She meant that sometimes we feel bad about things we had to do, even when they were the right things to do. And we can spend so much time feeling bad that we forget to live." "Are you living, Dad? Or are you just feeling bad?" The question cracked something open in Evan's chest, out of the mouths of children, delivered with surgical precision. Before he could answer, his phone buzzed. Harrison again. The man was persistent. Evan had to give him that. He silenced the call, but Noah had seen. That's the pilot from yesterday, the one who was your friend. Yeah. Why don't you want to talk to him? It's not that I don't want to, it's complicated, buddy. Noah pushed his eggs away entirely, fixed Evan with a look that was equal parts frustration and hurt. Everything with you is complicated. Flying is complicated. Why you stopped is complicated. Why those pilots care about you is complicated. I'm 7, Dad. Not stupid. You could just explain things to me instead of always saying they're complicated. The rebuke stung because it was deserved. Evan had spent 7 years hiding behind that word, using complexity as a shield against vulnerability. And now his son was calling him on it. You're right. I'm sorry. Evan took a breath, then another. The truth is, I'm scared. I'm scared that if I let myself be that person again, the pilot, the officer, the guy who knew how to fly and fight and lead, then I'll also have to be the person who carries all the bad things that came with it. The mistakes, the guilt, the nights I can't sleep because I'm remembering things I wish I could forget. Noah's expression softened slightly. But you already carry those things, Dad. I hear you sometimes at night, walking around, having bad dreams. Christ, Evan had thought he'd been quiet enough, had thought the walls were thick enough, had thought his son was young enough not to notice. I know, buddy. I'm working on it. Maybe talking to your pilot friends would help. Maybe they understand better than I can. The wisdom was staggering. 7 years old and somehow more emotionally intelligent than Evan had been at 37. Maybe you're right, Evan said quietly. When did you get so smart? I've always been smart. You just haven't been listening. The simple truth of it made Evan smile despite everything. Fair enough. Come on, let's go check on Grandma. Then maybe I'll call Colonel Harrison back. They cleared their trays and headed back to the cardiac ICU. The morning shift had started, nurses moving with efficient purpose, doctors making rounds. The waiting room was filling up with new families, new vigils, the universal ritual of hope and fear. The ICU nurse recognized them from last night. Your mother had a good night. Vitals are strong, and she's been awake a few times. Dr. Mendez will be by in about an hour to discuss next steps, but you can see her now if you'd like. They scrubbed their hands at the antiseptic station, followed protocol, entered the ICU proper. The lighting was softer than the waiting room, designed to promote rest. Monitors beeped in gentle rhythms, marking lives being carefully maintained. His mother's room was third on the left. Evan pushed aside the curtain and found her awake, sitting up slightly, looking infinitely better than she had last night. The color had returned to her face, and though she was still tethered to machines and tubes, there was life in her eyes. "There are my boys," she said, her voice stronger than Evan had expected. "Come here and give your grandmother a proper hello." Noah rushed forward carefully, mindful of the wires, and she wrapped him in a hug that belied her condition. Over his head, her eyes found Evan's. "You look terrible," she told him. "Thanks, Mom. You look pretty rough yourself." "I have an excuse. What's yours?" Evan moved closer, kissed her forehead gently. "Rough couple of days, but I'm okay now that you're okay." She held his gaze, reading him the way only mothers could. "Something happened. I can see it all over you. What is it?" "Our flight had an engine problem yesterday. Had to land at McGuire Air Force Base." Her expression shifted immediately, understanding flooding in. "Oh, Evan. Yeah, so that was unexpected. What happened?" While Noah explored the various machines with careful curiosity, Evan told her. The emergency landing, the salute, the tour of the flight line, the pilots who'd studied his work, Harrison's reappearance, the offer from General Bridger. His mother listened without interruption, her hand finding his, squeezing with surprising strength. "And how do you feel about all of it?" she asked when he finished. "I don't know, confused, scared, like someone opened a door I'd spent 7 years nailing shut. Maybe that door needed to be opened. Mom, listen to me, Evan." She struggled to sit up straighter, and he helped her adjust the pillows. "I've watched you these past 7 years. Watched you shrink yourself down into something small and safe. Watched you convince yourself that being a good father meant giving up being yourself. And I've kept my mouth shut because you needed time to heal, and that was your path to walk. But, honey, healing doesn't mean erasing who you were. It means integrating that person with who you're becoming." I can't go back to that life, Mom. I can't be responsible for those kinds of decisions again. Nobody's asking you to. But there's space between flying combat missions and changing oil at an auto shop. You're allowed to exist somewhere in that middle ground. You sound like Harrison. Then Harrison is a smart man. She glanced at Noah, who was asking a nurse about what different monitors measured. That boy needs to see his father be more than afraid. He needs to see you face the things that scare you, otherwise you're teaching him that when life gets hard, the answer is to hide. The observation cut deep because it was true. How many times had he told Noah to be brave, to face his fears, to never give up? And what example was he setting by doing the exact opposite? I don't know if I can, Evan admitted quietly. Then find out. Call your friend back. Listen to what they're offering. You don't have to say yes to anything, but you owe it to yourself and to Noah to at least consider that maybe there's a path forward that includes all of who you are. Before Evan could respond, Dr. Mendez entered with a tablet, and that particular expression doctors wore when delivering cautiously good news. Good morning, Mrs. Carter. How are you feeling? Like someone cracked my chest open and rearranged my plumbing, but otherwise peachy. Dr. Mendez smiled. That's actually a very accurate description of what we did. I'm pleased with your progress. Your heart is responding beautifully to the new blood flow, and if you continue improving at this rate, we'll move you out of ICU tomorrow and into a regular room. After that, we're looking at 5 to 7 days of hospital recovery, then cardiac rehab as an outpatient. When can I go home? If everything continues this well. About 10 days total. But Mrs. Carter, I need to be clear. This is major surgery. Your recovery will take months. You'll need help at home, especially for the first few weeks. Lifting restrictions, movement restrictions, medication management. Do you have support? Evan stepped forward. She does. I'll be here. His mother looked at him sharply. You have a job, Evan. You have responsibilities in New Jersey. My responsibility is making sure you recover properly. Everything else can wait. For how long? You can't just abandon your life for months. Watch me. Dr. Mendez looked between them with the knowing expression of someone who'd witnessed countless family dynamics play out in hospital rooms. I'll leave you to discuss logistics. But Mrs. Carter, you really will need someone staying with you for at least the first month. This isn't optional. After she left, his mother turned to Evan with frustration written across her face. You can't put your life on hold for me. What about Noah's school? What about your apartment? Your job? Noah can transfer schools temporarily. We'll keep the apartment. And Martinez will understand. I've got vacation time saved up. And if I need more, he'll work with me. Mom, you had major heart surgery. You almost died. Nothing else matters right now. Everything else matters. You're using me as an excuse to keep hiding from your life. The accusation hung in the air like a challenge. Noah had stopped his exploration of machines and was watching them both, sensing the tension. That's not fair, Evan said. Isn't it? Those pilots yesterday showed you a door back to who you used to be, and now, conveniently, you have a reason to stay in Chicago and avoid walking through it, to stay small and safe and scared. Her voice softened. Honey, I love that you want to take care of me, but I'm not going to let you use me as a shield against your own life. I'm not. Yes, you are. And we both know it. She held his gaze steadily. Call your friend from the Air Force. Have the conversation. See what they're actually offering. Then you can decide whether staying in Chicago is really about taking care of me or about avoiding taking care of yourself. Evan wanted to argue, wanted to insist she was wrong, wanted to defend the walls he'd built so carefully. But looking at her face, pale but determined, weakened but unbowed, he couldn't find the words. Because she was right. Of course she was right. Mothers always were. Fine, he said. I'll call Harrison, but I'm still staying to help with your recovery. We'll discuss that after you've had the conversation. Deal? You're supposed to be resting, not negotiating. I'm your mother. I can do both simultaneously. Despite everything, Evan smiled. This woman had survived raising him alone, survived poverty and prejudice, and now open-heart surgery. She was tougher than any enemy combatant he'd ever faced. Come here, Noah, she called. Tell me about this airplane you've been carrying around. Your father made you one just like it when he was about your age. As Noah launched into an excited explanation of his F-15 Eagle, Evan stepped out into the hallway, pulled out his phone, and stared at Harrison's number. His thumb hovered over the call button. 7 years of silence. 7 years of distance. 7 years of pretending that part of his life had never existed. And one emergency landing that had shattered all of it. He pressed call. Harrison answered on the second ring. "Carter, glad you called back. How's your mother?" "Recovering well, out of immediate danger. Long road ahead, but she's going to make it." "That's great news. Really great." Harrison paused. "So, listen, I know yesterday was a lot. I know you weren't expecting any of it. But Evan, there's something I need to talk to you about. Something General Bridger wanted me to run by you." "Dave, if this is about coming back to active duty, it's not. Just hear me out, okay?" Harrison's voice carried urgency. "The Air Force is developing a new training program. Advanced tactical development for the next generation of fighter pilots. They want someone who understands modern air combat but can also teach it, who has the tactical mind to help young pilots think three-dimensionally. And they want someone who understands the psychological weight of the job, who can help prepare these kids for the reality of what they're signing up for." Evan's heart was beating faster. "What kind of program?" "Consulting basis. You'd come to Nellis maybe 1 week a month, work with the fighter weapons school instructors, develop curriculum, maybe run some seminars. The rest of the time you could be anywhere, with your son doing whatever else you want to do. It's not active duty, it's not combat. It's just sharing what you know with people who need to learn it." "Why me? There are plenty of retired combat pilots who could do that. Because none of them revolutionized air combat doctrine the way you did. None of them have your tactical mind. And frankly, none of them have walked away from it the way you did. That perspective matters, Evan. The ability to say, this is what success looks like, and this is what it costs matters. These kids need to hear that from someone who lived it." Evan leaned against the wall, feeling the weight of possibility and responsibility warring in his chest. "I need to think about it." "Of course. Take all the time you need, but Evan, this isn't about us trying to pull you back into something you left behind. This is about creating something new, something that uses who you were to build, who you're becoming." Middle ground. There was that phrase again. "I'll think about it," Evan repeated. "I promise. But right now my priority is my mother's recovery. Everything else has to wait." "Understood. The offer stands whenever you're ready. And Evan, for what it's worth, I think you'd be incredible at this. I think you'd make a real difference." After they hung up, Evan stood in the hallway for a long time, watching nurses pass by, listening to the ambient sounds of the hospital, trying to process what had just been offered. Not a return to his old life, not a resurrection of Captain Carter, but something in between. Something that acknowledged who he'd been while respecting who he'd become. Something that might actually feel like moving forward instead of just hiding. He thought about Noah's face in that cockpit at McGuire, the wonder and longing. Thought about his mother's words about teaching his son to face fear. Thought about 7 years of making himself smaller, quieter, less. Thought about whether that had actually been healing or just a different kind of breaking. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Jennifer Holbrook, the attorney from the plane. He'd forgotten they'd exchanged numbers in that strange post-emergency camaraderie. Saw an article about yesterday's diversion. Mentioned a decorated combat pilot was on board. That was you, wasn't it? I wanted to say thank you for your service. And for what it's worth, I've been thinking about what you said. About being good at something that creates guilt. I quit my job this morning. Life's too short to spend it being excellent at things that make us miserable. Hope you find your middle ground. Evan read the text 3 times. A woman he'd sat next to for 2 hours had walked away from her entire career because of a conversation born from crisis. And here he was, still paralyzed by 7-year-old fear. He walked back into his mother's room. Noah was curled up in the chair beside her bed, and she was stroking his hair, humming something soft and familiar. They both looked up when he entered. "Well?" his mother asked. "What did your friend say?" Evan told them about Harrison's offer, about the consulting position, about the possibility of teaching without returning to combat, about middle ground. Noah sat up straighter, excitement lighting his face. "That sounds amazing, Dad. You get to teach people how to fly? Not how to fly, how to think, how to make decisions when everything is chaos. But you'd be around jets again. and you'd be helping people. That's what you said you wanted, right? To make a difference? It's not that simple, buddy. Why not? Noah's frustration was back, sharper now. Why does everything have to be so hard? Why can't you just do something that makes you happy? Because I don't know if that would make me happy or just remind me of everything that made me unhappy. So find out. Noah's voice cracked slightly, tears threatening. Just try it and find out, because Dad, you're not happy now. You pretend to be, but you're not. You work at a job you don't care about, and you don't have any friends, and you're sad all the time even when you're smiling. And I don't want you to be sad anymore. I want you to be you. The words hit like anti-aircraft fire, precise and devastating. Evan had thought he'd been hiding it better, had thought his son was too young to see through the performance. But children saw everything, especially the things adults tried hardest to conceal. His mother's hand found his. Listen to your son, Evan. He's telling you what I've been trying to tell you for 7 years. Being a good father doesn't mean being a martyr. It means being whole. And you can't be whole while you're hiding from half of who you are. Evan sat down heavily in the other chair, feeling the weight of their combined truth settling over him. What if I try and it doesn't work? What if going back to that world, even just the edges of it, brings back all the stuff I've been trying to escape? Then you deal with it, his mother said simply. You get help. You talk to someone. You work through it. But Evan, running from it hasn't made it go away. You still have nightmares. You're still carrying all that guilt. Maybe facing it head on is the only way through. I'm scared, Evan admitted, the words barely above a whisper. I know, honey. But you're also brave. You always have been. You just forgot for a while. Noah climbed out of his chair and into Evan's lap, wrapping his arms around his father's neck. I'll help you remember, he said softly. I'll remind you every day that you're brave. Evan held his son close, breathing in the scent of him, feeling the solid reality of this small person who believed in him more than he believed in himself. Okay, he said finally. Okay. I'll tell Harrison I'm interested. I'll at least explore what the program would look like, but I'm not making any promises beyond that. That's all anyone's asking, his mother said. Just look at the door before deciding whether to walk through it. They spent the rest of the day in the hospital. Dr. Mendez came back with more encouraging news. His mother was being moved to a regular room that afternoon, ahead of schedule. Her recovery was outpacing expectations. Mrs. Kowalski arrived with homemade soup and fresh bread, sitting with them while they ate, filling the room with the kind of casual normalcy that hospitals desperately needed. Other visitors came and went, neighbors, his mother's friends from church, people who'd been part of her life in ways Evan had missed by being absent. It made him realize how much he'd withdrawn, how much he'd let go of in his quest to become invisible. That evening, after Noah had fallen asleep in the chair and his mother was dozing, Evan stepped out into the hospital garden. It was small, tucked between buildings, but someone had planted flowers and installed a fountain. The sound of water was soothing. He pulled out his phone and called Harrison back. Hey, I know it's late, but I want to hear more about the program, not committing to anything yet. Just want to understand what it would actually look like. Harrison's voice carried undisguised relief. Of course. Let me walk you through it. They talked for an hour. Harrison explained the structure, the time commitment, the flexibility built in. Evan would develop curriculum in his own time, come to Nellis for 1-week intensive sessions with groups of pilots, work with a team of instructors who'd handle the day-to-day. He could maintain his life in New Jersey, be there for Noah, keep his apartment and his job if he wanted. Or Harrison suggested carefully, he could relocate to Nevada eventually if the program worked out. There were good schools near Nellis. His mother could move out there after she recovered if she wanted a change. I'm not ready to think that far ahead, Evan said. Fair enough. One step at a time. Harrison paused. You know what this really is, Evan? It's a chance to transform what happened to you into something that helps other people. That's not erasure. That's alchemy. After they hung up, Evan sat on the garden bench for a long time, watching stars appear in the darkening sky above Chicago. Somewhere up there, planes were flying. Commercial jets carrying people to reunions and funerals and vacations. Military aircraft on training missions. Maybe even fighters. Pilots executing maneuvers he'd invented, using tactics he'd written. his legacy, continuing without him. The question was whether he wanted to reclaim it or keep watching from the ground. He thought about Noah's face in that cockpit, about the excitement in those young pilots' eyes when they talked about missions his work had helped them survive, about his mother telling him not to waste his life punishing himself, about Jennifer Holbrook walking away from her entire career because one conversation had shown her that excellence without meaning was its own kind of prison. Maybe Harrison was right. Maybe this wasn't about going backward. Maybe it was about taking everything he'd learned, the good and the bad, the victories and the failures, and using it to build something new, something that honored both who he'd been and who he wanted to become. Maybe that was what middle ground actually meant. Not compromise, not half measures, but integration, wholeness, the courage to be fully yourself instead of a carefully edited version designed to hurt less. Evan looked down at the steel band on his wrist. He'd worn it every day for 7 years, a reminder of what he'd left behind. But maybe it didn't have to be a memorial. Maybe it could be a bridge. He pulled out his phone one more time and typed a message to Harrison. "I'm in. Let's talk details next week after my mother is stable. And Dave, thank you for not giving up on me." The response came almost immediately. "Never crossed my mind, brother. Welcome back to the fight. Even if it's a different kind of fight this time." Evan smiled despite himself. Different kind of fight. Yeah, that felt right. He headed back inside, back to his sleeping son and recovering mother, back to the small hospital room that held his entire world. Tomorrow he'd start figuring out logistics. How to balance Chicago and New Jersey, recovery support and new opportunities, fatherhood, and this strange, unexpected path forward. But tonight, he just sat in the chair between Noah and his mother, watching them both breathe steadily, feeling like maybe, for the first time in 7 years, he was breathing steadily too. Not because the past was resolved, not because the guilt was gone, not because anything fundamental had changed except one thing. He'd stopped running. And in stopping, he'd realized that maybe what he'd been running from all along wasn't the memories or the mistakes or the weight of command. Maybe he'd been running from the possibility that he could survive them, that he could integrate them, that he could be both broken and whole at the same time. Maybe that was what his mother meant about not punishing himself. Not that he should forget what happened or pretend it didn't matter, but that he should stop treating his own survival as a betrayal of the people who didn't survive. The hospital hummed around him, machines marking lives, nurses moving through their rounds, the constant low-level activity of a place dedicated to healing. And Evan sat in the middle of it, feeling something shift inside his chest. Not peace, not yet, but the possibility of peace. The first fragile suggestion that maybe, eventually, he could find a way to live that didn't feel like penance. That maybe Condor and Evan Carter weren't two different people at war. Maybe they were just one person, finally ready to fly again. 3 weeks later, Evan stood in the parking lot of Martinez Auto Works at 5:30 in the morning, keys in hand, staring at the building that had been his refuge and his prison for 7 years. The security light buzzed overhead, casting everything in sodium orange, making the world feel suspended between night and day. His phone showed a text from Harrison sent an hour ago. "Flight leaves at 0900. Car will pick you up at 0730. Looking forward to having you at Nellis, brother." Today was the day. His first consulting session. 1 week at the Fighter Weapons School, working with instructors to develop the new tactical curriculum. 1 week to see if he could actually do this without falling apart. The shop door opened and Martinez appeared, coffee in hand, eyebrows raised at finding Evan there so early. "Carter, what are you doing here? Thought you were flying out to Nevada today." "I am. Evan gestured helplessly at the building. "Wanted to see the place before I left. Make sure I wasn't forgetting anything." Martinez studied him with the knowing look of a man who'd employed enough broken people to recognize the signs. He was 50-something, thick around the middle, with hands that carried 40 years of mechanical work and eyes that missed nothing. "You're not coming back, are you?" The question hung in the pre-dawn air. Evan opened his mouth to protest, to insist this was just a temporary consulting gig, that he'd be back in a week and nothing would change. But Martinez deserved better than lies. "I don't know," Evan admitted. "Honestly, I don't know. This might be a one-time thing, or it might be the start of something different. I won't know until I try." Martinez nodded slowly, took a sip of his coffee. You've been a good employee, Carter. Never late, never complained, did quality work. But you know what I noticed? You never once looked happy when you were here. Not once in 7 years. You did the work, you did it well, but it was like watching someone go through the motions of being alive without actually living. The observation stung because it was true. I needed the steadiness, the simplicity. I get that, but there's a difference between steady and stagnant. Martinez pulled out his own keys, unlocked the door. Come on in. Let me make a fresh pot. We've got time. Inside, the shop smelled like it always did. Motor oil and tire rubber, coffee and industrial cleaner. The particular scent of work honestly done. Evan had spent countless hours in this space, hands deep in engines, solving mechanical problems that had clear solutions and predictable outcomes. Safe problems. Problems that couldn't haunt you. Martinez busied himself with the coffee maker while Evan walked through the garage, running his hand along workbenches, past the hydraulic lifts, the tool chests, the familiar geography of his exile. You know what my father told me when I opened this place? Martinez said from the office. He said every man's got to find work that feeds his soul, not just his stomach. And if you're lucky enough to find both, you hang on to it with everything you've got. He emerged with 2 steaming mugs. But Carter, this work never fed your soul. I could see that. You were feeding your stomach and starving everything else. It was enough. Was it? Because from where I'm standing, you looked like a man serving a sentence. And whatever crime you thought you committed, 7 years seems like enough time served. Evan accepted the coffee, wrapped his hands around the mug for warmth. What if I go to Nevada and it's a disaster? What if I can't handle being around that world again? Then you come back. The job will be here if you need it. But what if you go and it's not a disaster? What if you find out you can handle it? And more than that, what if you find out it's what you were supposed to be doing all along? Martinez leaned against the workbench. You're a good mechanic, Carter, but you were never meant to be just a mechanic. Anyone with eyes could see that. My son? Your son needs to see his father try. That's what kids need, not perfection, not martyrdom, just honest effort towards something that matters. They drank their coffee in companionable silence, 2 men who'd worked side by side without ever really knowing each other. Finally, Evan set down his empty mug. Thank you. For everything. For giving me a job when I needed one. For not asking questions I couldn't answer. For this conversation. You earned the job, and you earned the right to move past it. Martinez extended his hand. Go see what's waiting for you in Nevada. And Carter, whatever you're running from, whatever happened that made you hide here, it's okay to stop running now. You've run far enough. Evan shook his hand, feeling the calluses that matched his own, the grip of honest work. Then he walked out of Martinez Auto Works for what might be the last time, climbed into his 15-year-old Honda, engine rebuilt by his own hands, and drove back to the apartment. Noah was already awake, dressed in his favorite shirt, the one with fighter jets printed across the front that Evan had bought him the day after they returned from Chicago. The boy was vibrating with excitement, his backpack already by the door, his toy F-15 Eagle clutched in both hands. Dad, finally! I thought you were going to be late. Not a chance, buddy. You all packed? Packed an hour ago. Grandma called. She says to tell you she's proud of you and to stop being scared. Evan smiled despite his nerves. His mother had moved into a rehabilitation facility in Chicago, recovering ahead of schedule, already planning her move to Nevada for when Evan's consulting position became permanent. If it became permanent. She seemed more certain about that than he did. Your grandmother has a lot of opinions. She says opinions are just truths that other people aren't ready to hear yet. She would say that. Evan grabbed his own bag. Already packed, already triple-checked with military precision, he couldn't shake even after 7 years. Come on, car will be here in 20 minutes. They waited on the stoop of the apartment building, watching Hoboken wake up around them. The coffee shop across the street turning on lights. The bodega owner sweeping the sidewalk. The eternal rhythm of a city finding its morning momentum. A black sedan pulled up exactly on time. Military precision extended to civilian contractors, apparently. The driver stepped out, Air Force insignia subtle on his polo shirt. Captain Carter, I'm Sergeant Mills. I'll be driving you to Newark. Just Evan is fine? Yes, sir. The sir was automatic, ingrained. Mills loaded their bags into the trunk while Noah climbed into the back seat, pressing his face immediately to the window. The drive to Newark Liberty took 40 minutes through morning traffic. Noah peppered Mills with questions about the Air Force, about jets, about what Nellis was like. The sergeant answered patiently, clearly charmed by the boy's enthusiasm. Evan watched the city slide past, familiar streets carrying unfamiliar weight. How many times had he driven this route for other reasons? How many times had he told himself this was enough, that this small, circumscribed life was all he needed or deserved? At the airport, Mills walked them through security to a private terminal Evan hadn't known existed. Government contractors, apparently, didn't fly commercial. "Your flight will board in 30 minutes, Mills said. "Colonel Harrison wanted me to tell you he's looking forward to seeing you at Nellis." After Mills left, Noah tugged on Evan's sleeve. "Dad, are you okay? You look nervous." "I am nervous, buddy." "Why? You've flown tons of times. Not like this. Not going back to a place that used to be everything to me." Evan crouched down to Noah's level. "But you know what? Being nervous is okay. It means I care about what happens next. Grandma says being nervous means you're about to do something important. Your grandmother is full of wisdom today. She's full of wisdom every day. We just don't always listen." The flight to Las Vegas was smooth and surreal. The small jet carried only a handful of passengers, other contractors, a few uniformed personnel on assignment. Noah spent the entire flight with his face pressed to the window, tracking every cloud and landmark, asking Evan to identify geographical features below. Teaching moments. Father-son moments. The kind Evan had always tried to create, but which now felt different, weighted with possibility instead of penance. They landed at Nellis Air Force Base just after noon local time. The moment the cabin door opened, the Nevada heat hit like a physical force. Dry, intense, carrying the scent of desert and jet fuel. Harrison was waiting on the tarmac, dressed in flight suit, sunglasses reflecting the brutal sun. He broke into a grin when he saw them. "Carter, you actually showed up. I had 50-50 odds you'd bail at the last minute." "I thought about it." Evan shook his hand, felt the firm grip, the genuine welcome. "Dave, this is my son, Noah." Harrison crouched down, extended his hand to Noah. "Pleased to meet you, Noah. Your dad's told me a lot about you." Noah shook hands seriously. "He's told me about you, too. You were his wingman. That means you flew together and protected each other." "That's exactly right. Your dad saved my life more than once. I'm glad I finally get to meet the person he saved it for." The words hit Evan unexpectedly hard. He'd never thought about it that way, that surviving meant something because Noah existed, that his son was the reason the aftermath mattered at all. "Come on," Harrison said, standing. "Let me show you around before we dive into work. And Noah, I have something special planned for you if your dad says it's okay." They piled into a military vehicle, and Harrison drove them through the base. Nellis was massive, a sprawling complex of hangars and runways, housing and facilities, the nerve center of Air Force tactical aviation. Everywhere Evan looked, he saw pieces of his past. F-15s and F-16s, F-22 Raptors, and F-35 Lightning IIs, the evolution of air superiority made metal. Noah's commentary was constant and breathless. Harrison answered every question with patience, occasionally glancing at Evan with expressions that said, "Your kid is something special." And they stopped at the fighter weapons school compound. Harrison led them inside to a conference room where several officers waited. General Bridger stood as they entered, along with 3 lieutenant colonels Evan didn't recognize. "Captain Carter, welcome to Nellis." Bridger's handshake was firm, his smile genuine. "And this must be Noah. I've heard you're quite the aviation enthusiast." "I know all the specifications for the F-15 Eagle, sir." Noah's formality was adorable and heartbreaking. "My dad taught me." "Did he now?" Bridger looked at Evan with something like understanding. "Well, while your dad is in meetings this afternoon, we've arranged for you to spend some time in our youth center. And later, if you're interested, we have a simulator that I think you might enjoy." Noah's eyes went wide. "A real flight simulator?" "Real as they come. Colonel Harrison will show you how it works." After Noah was escorted away by a cheerful lieutenant who promised snacks and video games and simulator time, the room's energy shifted, became professional, serious. Bridger gestured to the seats around the conference table. Gentlemen, let's get started. Captain Carter, what we're about to discuss is the future of tactical fighter training, and we need your expertise to make it work. The next 3 hours were intense. They walked Evan through the current curriculum, the gaps they'd identified, the areas where young pilots were struggling. They showed him accident reports, near misses, tactical failures that had resulted from pilots who knew how to fly but didn't know how to think. The problem, one of the lieutenant colonels explained, is that we're excellent at teaching technical skills, but we're failing at teaching judgment, decision-making under pressure, how to make impossible choices when every option is terrible. Evan felt the weight of those words, how to make impossible choices. His entire career summarized in one phrase. "What do you need from me?" he asked. Bridger leaned forward. "We need you to develop a curriculum that teaches pilots how to think like you did, multi-axis problem solving, tactical creativity under pressure, and most importantly, how to carry the weight of command without letting it crush you." That last part, I'm not sure I'm qualified to teach that. You're the most qualified person I know. Bridger's voice was gentle but firm. Because you faced that weight, and you made the hard choice to step back when you needed to. That's not weakness, Captain. That's wisdom. And these young pilots need to learn that wisdom before they break the way too many good officers have broken. The conversation continued, diving into specifics, scenario design, psychological preparation, the integration of tactical excellence with emotional intelligence. They wanted Evan to build something that had never existed before, a bridge between the technical and the human, between flying and being human while flying. It was terrifying. It was overwhelming. It was exactly what he'd been avoiding for 7 years because it required him to integrate the person he'd been with the person he'd become. When they finally broke for the day, Evan's head was spinning. Harrison walked him out, heading toward the youth center to collect Noah. "What do you think?" Harrison asked. "Too much?" "Maybe. I don't know. It's more comprehensive than I expected, more psychological." That's the point. We've got plenty of people who can teach tactics. We need someone who can teach humanity, someone who understands that the cost of excellence is real and has to be managed, not ignored. They found Noah in the simulator, flight suit 3 sizes too big, helmet wobbling on his head, flying a training mission with intense concentration. The instructor beside him was offering guidance, but Noah was clearly handling the basics with surprising competence. "He's a natural," the instructor said when he saw Evan. "Got the touch. And he asked the right questions, not just how, but why. Smart kid." Evan watched his son fly, watched him make decisions, watched him light up with joy every time he executed a maneuver correctly. And something inside his chest loosened. This was what it looked like when passion and aptitude aligned. When someone found the thing they were meant to do and did it without the weight of trauma and guilt making it feel like punishment. Noah could have this. Could have the joy of flight without the burden Evan had carried. Could be taught properly, safely, with awareness of the psychological costs built into the training from the start. If Evan helped build that curriculum, he'd be giving his son, and hundreds of other young pilots, something Evan never had: protection, preparation, permission to be human while doing inhuman things. Maybe that was the middle ground, not flying again himself, but making it possible for others to fly better, healthier, more sustainably. After Noah's simulator session, Harrison took them to dinner at the officers' club. The room was full of pilots, their conversations a familiar symphony of call signs and good-natured trash talk, and the particular camaraderie of people who trusted each other with their lives. Evan felt himself relaxing despite himself. This was his tribe. These were his people. He'd missed them without letting himself acknowledge the missing. "Dad, look!" Noah pointed to a wall covered in photographs, squadron pictures going back decades. "Is that you?" Evan followed his pointing finger and froze. There it was, his old squadron photo, the same one he'd seen at McGuire. Young faces, confident smiles, the immortal invincibility of people who hadn't yet learned what mortality actually meant. And there was Evan, back row, arms crossed, that cocky grin. "That's you," Noah breathed. "You look so different." I was different, buddy. You look happy. The observation cut deep. He had been happy in that photograph, had believed in what he was doing, had thought the cost was worth it because the mission mattered, and he was good at it, and good at it meant lives saved. He'd lost that certainty, lost that happiness, lost the ability to believe that being excellent at terrible things was anything other than a burden. But looking at his son's face now, seeing the wonder and pride there, Evan wondered if maybe he'd been wrong. Maybe excellence wasn't the problem. Maybe the problem was bearing that excellence alone, without support, without acknowledgement that it cost something. Maybe the problem was thinking he had to choose between being Condor and being Evan, when the truth was, he'd always been both. I was happy, Evan said quietly. I loved what I did, right up until it broke me. And then I thought the problem was the work, but maybe the problem was that I didn't know how to do the work without it consuming me. So teach people how to do it better, Noah said with 7-year-old logic. Teach them so they don't get broken like you did. Harrison, who'd been listening quietly, caught Evan's eye and nodded. Yes, exactly that. The rest of the week unfolded in a blur of meetings and curriculum development and late-night strategy sessions. Evan found himself in rooms with some of the best tactical minds in the Air Force, collaborative problem-solving that reminded him why he'd loved this work in the first place. They wanted his input on everything. Scenario design, stress inoculation training, building resilience, teaching young pilots to recognize the signs of trauma and burnout before they became career-ending. Creating a culture where asking for help was seen as strength, not weakness. It was revolutionary. It was necessary. It was the program Evan wished had existed when he was flying. Noah spent his days in the youth center and the base library, soaking up everything about aviation he could find. In the evenings, they'd have dinner together, and Noah would recount everything he'd learned while Evan shared what he'd been working on. Father and son, both learning, both growing, both finding their way towards something neither had known they needed. On the final day, Bridger called Evan into his office. The space was impressive, walls covered in photographs and commendations, a career's worth of service displayed with understated pride. So, Bridger said, gesturing for Evan to sit, what do you think? Is this something you want to be part of? Evan had known this conversation was coming, had rehearsed answers in his head for days. But sitting here now, looking at this man who'd built a career on developing leaders, he found himself saying something different than he'd planned. I spent 7 years trying to forget who I was, trying to make myself smaller, quieter, less. I thought that was healing, but this week I realized I was wrong. I wasn't healing. I was just hiding from the infection instead of treating it. And now? Now I think maybe healing looks different than I thought. Maybe it's not about becoming someone new. Maybe it's about integrating who I was with, who I want to be, taking the tactical mind and the hard-won experience and using them to help other people avoid the mistakes I made. Bridger nodded slowly. That sounds like a yes. It is, with conditions. Evan leaned forward. I need to be in Chicago for the next 2 months while my mother recovers. After that, I'll relocate to Nevada, but I need time to get Noah settled in a new school, find housing, build stability before I dive in completely. And I need it understood that if this starts triggering the same patterns that broke me before, I reserve the right to step back without judgment. Done. All of it. Bridger extended his hand. Welcome to the team, Evan. Not Captain Carter, not Condor, just Evan, bringing everything he is to help build something new. The handshake felt like a beginning, not a return, but a transformation. That evening, Harrison threw a small gathering at his house. Just a handful of pilots, some instructors, people who'd known Evan before and were curious about who he was now. It could have been awkward, but somehow it wasn't. There was no pressure to be who he used to be, no judgment about who he'd become. Just people sharing stories and beer and the easy comfort of mutual respect. Noah fell asleep on Harrison's couch around 9, worn out by a week of adventure. Evan sat outside on the patio, looking at the desert stars, listening to the distant sound of aircraft returning from night training missions. Harrison joined him, 2 beers in hand. You did good this week. Really good. The curriculum you helped develop is going to change lives. I hope so. That's the goal. More than that, You showed these young instructors that it's possible to be excellent without being destroyed by it, that it's okay to acknowledge the cost, that asking for help isn't failure. Harrison paused. You know what the most powerful moment was for me? When you told that room full of captains and majors that you'd walked away because you needed to, and that it was the right decision at the time. Half of them were struggling with the same demons, but they'd never heard a superior officer admit it was okay to struggle. I didn't feel superior. I felt like a cautionary tale. You were a roadmap. There's a difference. They sat in comfortable silence, two old friends who'd been through hell together and somehow found their way to something like peace. Finally, Evan said, I need to tell you something about that day in Kandahar, about the decision that ended my career. You don't have to. I do. Because you were there, and you've never pushed me to talk about it, and I've never thanked you for that. But I need to say it out loud. I need someone who understands to hear it. Harrison set down his beer, gave Evan his full attention. The intel was wrong, Evan began. They told us the valley was clear of friendlies. They told us the enemy positions were isolated. They told us we could strike without risk of collateral damage. And I believed them because I wanted to believe them, because the mission mattered, and we'd trained for exactly that scenario. I remember. But when we got there, there were friendly forces everywhere, mixed in with enemy positions. Urban combat, close quarters, exactly the nightmare scenario we'd been promised wouldn't happen. And I had to make a choice in about 15 seconds. Call off the strike and let the enemy reinforce, or go ahead knowing we might hit our own people. You called in the strike danger close. You saved 17 Marines and killed 2 of our own pilots who took ground fire providing cover. Evan's voice cracked. I made the right tactical decision. Everyone agreed. The inquiry cleared me. The Marines I saved showed up at the hearing to testify on my behalf, but none of that changed the fact that I gave an order that got good people killed. That wasn't your fault. The faulty intel was the problem, not your decision. I know that intellectually, but knowing it and believing it are different things. And for 7 years, I couldn't reconcile being the person who made the right choice with being the person who has to live with the consequences of that choice. Harrison was quiet for a long moment. So what's different now? Now I think maybe both things can be true at once. I made the right choice, and I carry the weight of it. I saved lives, and I'm haunted by the losses. I was excellent at my job, and the excellence cost me. All of it is true simultaneously, and maybe the answer isn't choosing which truth matters more. Maybe the answer is holding all of it with compassion instead of judgment. That sounds like something a therapist would say. I've been seeing one. Started 2 weeks after we got back from Chicago. Figured if I was going to do this, really do this, I needed professional help processing the stuff I've been sitting on. Good. That's good, Evan. Harrison's voice was thick with emotion. I'm proud of you, for getting help, for coming back, for being brave enough to try again. I'm not brave. I'm terrified. Bravery and terror aren't opposites. They're partners. You can't have one without the other. They finished their beers in silence. Inside, someone was telling a story that generated laughter. Normal people having a normal evening, except they all flew machines that could kill thousands and carried the weight of that capability with varying degrees of grace. Evan's people. Even after 7 years away, they were still his people. The next morning, Evan and Noah flew back to Newark. The week had been transformative, exhausting, overwhelming in the best possible way. Noah slept most of the flight, worn out but happy, his toy F-15 Eagle resting on the tray table. When they landed, Jennifer Holbrook was waiting in the terminal. Evan had texted her during the week, and she'd insisted on meeting them at the airport. So? She asked, after hugging them both. How was it? Life-changing, Evan admitted. Terrifying and perfect and completely overwhelming. I quit my job, she said. Joined a nonprofit that does legal aid for veterans. Pay cut of about 60%, but I actually care about the work. That conversation on the plane changed my life. I think it changed mine too. They went for coffee while waiting for their luggage, and Evan found himself telling her everything. The curriculum development, the conversations with young pilots, the realization that he could be both broken and useful, both haunted and healing. You know what you're describing? Jennifer said. Post-traumatic growth. It's when trauma becomes a catalyst for positive change, instead of just a wound. You're not ignoring what happened or pretending it doesn't matter. You're using it as fuel for something meaningful. That sounds better than what I've been doing, which is just marinating in guilt. Way better, she smiled. I'm proud of you. And I barely know you, but I'm proud anyway. The next 2 months were a whirlwind of logistics. Evan worked remotely from Chicago, developing curriculum while staying close to his mother during her recovery. Noah enrolled in a Chicago school temporarily, making friends with the resilience of childhood. They found a rhythm: hospital visits in the morning, work during the day, homework in the evening, dinner with Evan's mother once she was cleared for outings. She was healing faster than anyone expected, fueled by determination and the knowledge that her son was finally healing too. They talked about Nevada, about relocating together once Evan's position became permanent, about starting over in a place that held no ghosts. You seem lighter, she told him one evening over dinner. Like you're not carrying the world anymore. I'm carrying the same weight. I've just stopped pretending it isn't there, and I've started letting other people help me carry it. That's called being human, honey. Welcome back to the species. In early November, they made the move to Nevada. Evan found a house near Nellis, small but sufficient, with a yard where Noah could play and enough space for his mother when she joined them in a few months. Noah started at a new school, nervous but excited, making friends who knew nothing about Evan's past and didn't care. Just another kid with a dad who worked on base. Normal. Unremarkable. Except at parent-teacher conferences when Noah's teacher pulled Evan aside and said, he wrote an essay about his hero, about a father who was scared but did the brave thing anyway. I thought you should know, whatever you're doing, it's working. He's a remarkable kid. The curriculum launched in January with the first cohort of pilots. Evan stood in front of 25 young officers, looking at their eager faces, seeing himself at their age. My name is Evan Carter, he began. Some of you know my call sign. Some of you have studied my tactical work. But that's not why I'm here. I'm here because I made the mistake of thinking excellence was enough. I thought if I was smart enough, skilled enough, dedicated enough, the weight of command wouldn't touch me. I was wrong. And I spent 7 years paying for that mistake. The room was absolutely silent. What I'm going to teach you over the next 6 weeks is how to be excellent without being destroyed by it. How to make impossible choices and live with them. How to ask for help before you break. How to be both a warrior and a human being, because this Air Force needs both. He saw recognition in their faces. Relief. The realization that someone understood. This won't be easy, Evan continued. Some of what we discuss will be uncomfortable. But I promise you this. If you engage with this program honestly, you'll be better pilots, better leaders, better humans. Not despite your struggles, but because of them. The first cohort was transformative. Pilots opened up about fears and doubts they'd never voiced. They practiced scenario after scenario, learning to make decisions under pressure while acknowledging the emotional weight. They built skills for recognizing trauma symptoms in themselves and their wingmen, and they thrived. Word spread quickly. By the third cohort, there was a waiting list. By the sixth, Evan's curriculum was being adopted by other branches. Young pilots were crediting the program with saving their careers, their marriages, their lives. Harrison visited during the 9th cohort, sitting in on a session where Evan walked pilots through a scenario remarkably similar to Kandahar. Watched them struggle with the same impossible choice Evan had faced. Watched Evan guide them through not just the tactical decision, but the emotional aftermath. You're doing exactly what you were meant to do, Harrison said afterward, taking your worst moment and using it to prevent other people's worst moments. It still hurts, Evan admitted. Talking about it every time, reliving it. Some days I wonder if I'm just traumatizing myself over and over. Are you? My therapist says I'm processing it differently each time. That repetition with support is part of healing, that teaching it gives me control over a narrative I felt powerless in. Evan shrugged. I don't know if that's true, but it feels true. Then trust it. Trust yourself. In March, Evan's mother moved to Nevada. She'd sold her Chicago house, packed up 60 years of memories, and started over at 73 years old. Found a small apartment near Evan's house, joined a book club, started volunteering at the base library. "I'm proud of you," she told Evan on moving day, looking around her new space. "Not for being successful or decorated or any of that. I'm proud because you stopped hiding. You let yourself be seen. That takes more courage than any combat mission." In April, Noah's second grade class took a field trip to Nellis. The children toured the base, saw the aircraft, met pilots. And Noah walked through it all with quiet pride, pointing out his father occasionally. "That's my dad, he teaches pilots how to think." But mostly just being a kid on a field trip, not defined by Evan's past, not burdened by it. Just a boy with a father who worked on base and came home for dinner and helped with homework and was present, consistently, reliably present. That evening, Evan tucked Noah into bed in their new house, in their new city, in their new life. "Dad?" Noah's voice was sleepy. "Are you happy now?" Evan thought about the question, about the weight he still carried, the nightmares that still came sometimes, the guilt that never fully disappeared, about the meaningful work and the supportive community and the therapy that was slowly rebuilding his capacity for joy. "I'm getting there, buddy, day by day." "Good. You deserve to be happy." "So do you." "I am happy. I have you and Grandma and friends at school, and we live near jets. That's everything I need." Out of the mouths of children, wisdom disguised as innocence, the reminder that happiness wasn't about having everything figured out. It was about being present for the life you actually had instead of mourning the life you thought you should have. Evan kissed his son's forehead, turned off the light, stood in the doorway watching him drift to sleep. This child who'd believed in him when he couldn't believe in himself, who'd pushed him to be brave when bravery felt impossible, who'd reminded him that being a good father meant being whole, not perfect. His phone buzzed with a text from Harrison. "Drinks tomorrow night? Bringing some of the Cohort 9 graduates. They want to thank you personally." Evan smiled, typed back, "I'll be there." He walked to his own bedroom, paused at the window to look out at the desert night. Somewhere overhead, aircraft were flying training missions, executing maneuvers he'd invented, using tactics he'd refined, prepared by curriculum he'd developed. His legacy, continuing and evolving and helping people survive. On his nightstand sat a photograph, the one from the officers' club at Nellis, his old squadron. But next to it was a new photo, Evan and Noah at the Grand Canyon, taken last month, both grinning at the camera with matching joy. Past and present, who he'd been and who he was becoming. Not at war anymore, but integrated. Both parts of one person who'd finally figured out that healing didn't mean forgetting. It meant learning to carry the weight with grace instead of grinding yourself into dust beneath it. Evan picked up the steel band from his wrist. He'd started taking it off at night now, giving himself permission to rest from what it represented, and set it beside the photographs. The call sign engraved on the inside caught the lamplight, Condor. He'd spent 7 years thinking that name belonged to someone else, someone he'd lost or killed or buried. But standing here now, looking at the evidence of his life rebuilt, he realized the truth. Condor hadn't died. Condor had just been resting, learning, growing, becoming someone who could fly again without burning out. Tomorrow he'd put the band back on. Tomorrow he'd teach another cohort of young pilots how to be excellent without being destroyed. Tomorrow, he'd continue the slow, difficult, necessary work of healing while serving. But tonight, he was just Evan, just a father tucking in his son, just a man who'd found middle ground between who he'd been and who he wanted to be. Just a person learning, finally, that being human wasn't weakness. It was the foundation of every kind of strength that mattered. He turned off the light and climbed into bed, and for the first time in 7 years, sleep came easily. No nightmares, no restless pacing, just rest. The kind of rest you earned by facing what scared you instead of running from it. The kind of rest that came from knowing you were exactly where you were supposed to be, doing exactly what you were meant to do, surrounded by people who saw you, really saw you, and chose to stand beside you anyway. The sky had waited. And now, in his own way, on his own terms, Evan Carter was flying again. Not in an aircraft, not in combat, but in purpose and meaning and the daily choice to transform pain into protection for others. And that, he was finally learning, was its own kind of heroism. The quiet kind, the sustainable kind, The kind that didn't destroy you in the process of saving others. The kind that might actually last. Outside his window, the Nevada stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. Inside the house, his son slept peacefully. In Chicago, his mother rested in her new apartment. At Nellis, young pilots studied curriculum that might save their lives and their souls. And Evan slept. Finally, blessedly, deeply slept. A good man. A healing man. A whole man. Still carrying the weight, but no longer crushed by it. Still haunted by the past, but no longer imprisoned by it. Still afraid sometimes, but brave enough to try anyway. Just Evan. Just Condor. Just one person who'd learned the hardest lesson of all, that you didn't have to choose between excellence and humanity. You could be both. You could carry both. You could honor both. You just had to be brave enough to try. And day by day, step by step, he was.